Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Marcus Wheeler, and I am 34 years old. This happened in August 2024. The pines swayed against the dusk sky, their silhouettes like gnarled fingers reaching for the fading light. My boots crunched over the carpet of dried pine needles as I adjusted my pack, the weight of it digging into my shoulders. 3 days into our hiking trip through the Chattahoochee National Forest, and I was beginning to wonder if this whole reconnect with nature thing was really worth it. "You doing all right back there, Marcus?" called Jake from up ahead. His voice bounced between the trees, somehow both close and distant at the same time. "Yeah, just taking in the scenery," I lied. In truth, my calves were burning, and a blister had been forming on my left heel for the past hour. But I wasn't about to admit that to Jake Weber, outdoorsman extraordinaire, my oldest friend and the mastermind behind this expedition. Jake had always been the adventurous one between us. While I built a comfortable life as a software engineer in Atlanta, complete with an air-conditioned office and ergonomic chair, Jake became an environmental scientist who spent half his time in the field. When he suggested this trip as a way to celebrate our 20 years of friendship since high school, I couldn't say no, especially not after he mentioned the third member of our party would be joining us. "How much farther to the cabin?" asked Nora, falling back to walk beside me. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and despite 3 days without makeup or proper showering facilities, she still looked stunning. Nora Chen, Jake's colleague and the reason I'd agreed to this trip in the first place. We'd met at Jake's birthday party 6 months ago, and I'd been nursing a crush ever since. This trip was my chance to impress her, or at least not embarrass myself completely. "Should be just another mile or so," I said, trying to keep the fatigue from my voice. At least according to Jake's super trustworthy, "I know these woods like the back of my hand" navigation system. She laughed, the sound like a bell in the stillness of the forest. "At least we'll have real beds tonight. I'm not sure my back can handle another night on the ground." "Tell me about it," I groaned. "I think I've got a permanent pine cone imprint on my spine." The Chattooga Ridge cabin was supposed to be our reward after 3 days of hiking through the wilderness. Jake had found it online, a rustic but comfortable shelter maintained by a local conservancy group, available for hikers who booked in advance. Running water, a wood stove, and actual beds sounded like luxury after spending nights in tents. "There it is," Jake called out, pointing through a break in the trees. The cabin materialized from the gathering darkness, a solid square structure built from rough-hewn logs. It looked old, but well-maintained, with a small covered porch and chimney jutting from the moss-covered roof. Warm light spilled from the windows, which was odd. We hadn't expected anyone else to be there. "That's strange," Jake muttered as we approached. "The booking system said we were the only ones scheduled for this week." I felt a twist of unease in my stomach. Maybe the previous guests are running late leaving? Jake shook his head. "Let me check it out." We approached the cabin cautiously. The porch steps creaked under our weight as Jake knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle, unlocked. The door swung open with a protracted groan. "Hello," he called into the dimly lit interior. "Anyone here?" Silence answered him. We stepped inside, the floorboards protesting beneath our boots. The cabin was a single large room with a small kitchenette in one corner, a sitting area with a stone fireplace, and 3 beds arranged along the opposite wall. A kerosene lamp burned on the table, casting long shadows across the room. "Someone was definitely here," Nora said, pointing to a chair pulled away from the table, a half-empty mug of something still sitting on the worn wooden surface. I crossed the room and touched the mug. Still warm. Jake frowned, scanning the cabin. "Their gear is here too. Backpack, boots by the door. They must have stepped out." "Maybe they went to collect firewood," Nora suggested. though her voice had taken on an edge of uncertainty. Maybe. Jake didn't sound convinced. Well, I guess we'll just have to share the cabin tonight. There's enough room. I nodded, but something felt off. Who would leave a lamp burning and the door unlocked in the middle of nowhere? And where had they gone as darkness was falling? I'm going to check around outside, Jake said, dropping his backpack on the floor. You two get settled. I'll come with you, I said quickly, not wanting to appear less brave than him in front of Nora. No need, Jake replied. I'll just do a quick perimeter check. Won't be long. Before I could protest, he was out the door, leaving Nora and me alone in the strange cabin. This is cozy, Nora said, attempting to lighten the mood as she set her pack down on one of the beds. Yeah, real homey, I muttered, moving to the kitchenette. The counter held a few supplies, some canned goods, a pot, a camping stove. Everything neat and orderly. Too orderly for someone who had just stepped out momentarily. I opened one of the cupboards and found plates, cups, and bowls, all plastic, practical for a cabin in the woods, and a prescription bottle. I picked it up, reading the label. Risperidone, I said aloud. What's that? Nora asked, coming over to look. It's an antipsychotic medication, I replied, setting it back exactly where I found it. My cousin had been prescribed the same thing during a rough patch in college. Treats schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, that sort of thing. A heavy silence fell between us. I didn't need to voice what we were both thinking. We were in a remote cabin, hours from civilization, possibly sharing space with someone who might be experiencing a serious mental health crisis and was currently unmedicated and wandering in the woods. Maybe we should... Nora began, but was cut off by the sound of the door opening. Jake stepped back inside, his expression grim. No sign of anyone. But I found something weird. He held up a small notebook. This was by the woodpile. Looks like a journal. He handed it to me. The cover was worn leather, the pages within filled with cramped, messy handwriting. I flipped through it, scanning entries. May 15th. The woods keep changing. Paths that should be there aren't. Trees that weren't there yesterday suddenly appear. No one believes me. May 18th. Saw it again today. Just a glimpse, but I know what I saw. Black shape, moving too fast through the trees. Not an animal. Not a person. Something else. May 30. It's following me now. I hear it at night, scratching at the cabin walls. The rangers say I'm imagining things. They don't understand. They can't hear the whispers. The entries continued, becoming more erratic and paranoid with each passing page. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. August 12th. The whispers are getting louder. They're calling me deeper into the forest. I think I need to answer them. I think I need to see what they want. If I don't come back, tell them it was the thing that calls itself Sasquatch, Tom. I looked up from the journal, a chill racing down my spine despite the warmth of the cabin. Guys, I don't think we should stay here tonight. Don't be ridiculous, Jake said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. It's dark out, we're tired, and this is clearly just the ramblings of someone who forgot to take their medication. He nodded toward the prescription bottle I'd found earlier. Jake's right, Nora added, though she looked unsettled. We can't go wandering around the forest at night. Besides, where would we go? The next shelter is miles away. I wanted to argue, but they had a point. The rational part of my brain knew that we were probably dealing with the delusions of someone experiencing a mental health episode, not some supernatural forest entity. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck refused to lie flat. Fine, I conceded. But we take shifts sleeping tonight. Someone stays awake at all times. Jake nodded. That's fair. I'll take first watch. You two get some rest. Despite my unease, exhaustion won out. I claimed one of the beds, removing only my boots before crawling under the scratchy wool blanket. Nora took the bed beside mine, while Jake settled into a chair by the window, the mysterious journal open in his lap. I didn't expect to fall asleep so quickly. But the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake to the sound of scratching. Soft, persistent scratching, like fingernails against wood. The cabin was dark. The kerosene lamp had been extinguished and only the faint glow of moonlight filtered through the windows. I sat up, disoriented, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Jake," I whispered into the darkness. No response. The chair by the window was empty. I glanced at Nora's bed. She was still there, a lumpy shape under the blankets, her breathing deep and regular. The scratching continued, definitely coming from outside. Against the wall of the cabin, just as the journal had described. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone. The screen illuminated 3:17 a.m. No signal, of course. I used the flashlight function to sweep the room. Jake's backpack was still there, but his boots were gone from beside the door. Had he gone outside to investigate the sound? That would be just like him, brave to the point of recklessness. Or maybe he'd just stepped out to use the bathroom. The scratching stopped abruptly. I held my breath, straining to hear in the sudden silence. Then a new sound. Footsteps on the porch. The door handle turned with a squeak. I quickly switched off my phone's flashlight, plunging the room back into darkness. The door swung open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the night sky. "Jake?" I called softly. The figure stepped inside, and I relaxed slightly as Jake's familiar outline became clear. He closed the door behind him, moving with an odd stiffness. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Did you hear that scratching?" He turned toward me but didn't answer. In the dim moonlight, I could see that something was wrong. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Jake!" He took a step forward, then another. His breathing was loud, rasping. "I saw it, Marcus," he finally said, his voice strange and flat. "In the woods. It's beautiful." My blood went cold. "What did you see, Jake?" "Sasquatch Tom," he replied, and there was an unsettling reverence in his tone. "He showed me things, whispered things. You need to see too." He took another step toward me. I fumbled for my phone again, turning on the flashlight and aiming it at Jake's face. I nearly dropped the phone at what I saw. Jake's eyes were wide, pupils dilated so much that his irises were just thin rings of color. But worse than that was his expression. A rictus grin stretched across his face, impossibly wide, exposing too many teeth. "What the hell, Jake?" I scrambled back on the bed. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong," he said, that terrible smile never faltering. "Everything's finally right. You need to come with me, Marcus, into the woods. He's waiting." "Nora," I called, my voice cracking with fear. "Nora, wake up!" Jake's head snapped toward Nora's bed with an unnaturally quick movement. "Don't wake her. She's not ready to see." "Not like you, Marcus. You've always been open to the whispers, even if you pretend not to hear them." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew I needed to get to Nora. I launched myself off the bed, attempting to move around Jake, but he was faster, blocking my path with startling speed. "You can't run from this, Marcus," he said, reaching for me with stiff fingers. "No one can." I ducked under his arm and lunged for Nora's bed, grabbing her shoulder and shaking her roughly. "Nora, wake up! Something's wrong with Jake." She stirred, groaning sleepily. "What? Marcus, what's going on?" "We need to leave. Now," I said urgently, pulling her upright. "Jake's acting strange. I think he might be having the best night of his life," Jake interrupted, that horrible grin still fixed on his face. He had moved to stand between us and the door. "Sasquatch Tom has been waiting for you two. For all of us. He's been waiting for so long." Nora was fully awake now, her eyes wide with fear as she took in Jake's bizarre appearance and behavior. "Jake, you're scaring us. What's happened to you?" "I've been enlightened," he replied. "And you will be too." He lunged suddenly, grabbing Nora's wrist with one hand. She screamed, trying to pull away, but his grip was unnaturally strong. I reacted instinctively, driving my shoulder into Jake's midsection. We both crashed to the floor, Jake's grip on Nora breaking as we fell. I scrambled to my feet, pulling Nora up with me. "Run!" I shouted, pushing her toward the door. We burst out onto the porch, the night air cool against my face. The forest loomed around us, dark and impenetrable. Behind us, I could hear Jake getting to his feet, his breathing loud and rasping. "Which way?" Nora gasped, her eyes wild with panic. I pointed to the trail we'd come in on. "That way, back toward the ranger station." We plunged into the darkness, the beam of my phone flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. Behind us, the cabin door slammed and Jake's voice called out, unnaturally loud in the stillness of the forest. "You can't escape the whispers, Marcus. They're in your head now, too." We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. I kept a tight grip on Nora's hand, terrified of losing her in the darkness. "What's happening?" she panted as we ran. "What's wrong with Jake?" "I don't know," I gasped. "Drugs, maybe? Or he's having some kind of psychotic break?" But even as I said it, I knew it didn't feel right. The way Jake had moved, that impossible smile, the unnatural strength, it was like something else was wearing Jake's body. We reached a fork in the trail, and I hesitated, my memory failing me in the panic. Which way had we come from? "This way," Nora said, tugging me to the right. We continued on, our pace slowing as exhaustion began to set in. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. Behind us, the forest remained silent. No sign of pursuit. "I think we've lost him," I said, finally stopping to catch my breath. "We should be able to—" A twig snapped in the darkness ahead of us. We both froze. "Jake," Nora called uncertainly. Another snap, closer this time. Then another. Something was moving toward us through the trees. I raised my phone, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating a figure standing on the path ahead. Not Jake. A man, tall and gaunt, with a wild tangle of white beard reaching down to his chest. He wore tattered clothes that might once have been hiking gear, now reduced to rags that hung from his emaciated frame. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath, pale, almost colorless, reflecting the light like an animal's. "You heard the whispers," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "You're coming to see Sasquatch Tom." I stumbled back, pulling Nora with me. "Who are you? What have you done to our friend?" The old man tilted his head, an unsettlingly bird-like movement. "I'm Bernard, been living in these woods for 30 years, and I haven't done anything to your friend. Sasquatch Tom did that. He's been waiting for you." "What are you talking about?" Nora demanded, her voice shaking. "What is Sasquatch Tom?" Bernard's thin lips stretched into a smile that reminded me too much of Jake's unnatural grin. "Not what, who? He's been in these woods longer than anyone. Longer than the forest itself, some say. And he gets lonely, calls to people, makes them hear the whispers." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "We're leaving, now. Getting help for our friend." Bernard shook his head slowly. "Can't leave. Not now that you've heard the whispers. They're in your head now, calling you deeper. You feel it, don't you, boy?" And the terrible thing was, I did feel something. A pull, an urge to go deeper into the forest, away from the trails, away from civilization. It had been there since I'd woken up, growing stronger with each passing minute. Nora must have felt me stiffen because she squeezed my hand hard. "Marcus, don't listen to him. He's clearly not well." Bernard cackled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Ask him if he hears them." "Marcus?" Nora's voice was small, uncertain. I couldn't lie to her. There's something, like a pressure in my head, a direction I feel pulled toward. Bernard nodded, satisfied. "See, Sasquatch Tom's picked you. Special you are." "Why is he called Sasquatch Tom?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I frantically tried to think of a way out of this situation. "Because that's what he first looked like to the loggers who found him, back in the 1800s, Bernard replied. Big hairy fella in the woods, but that's just one of his faces. He wears many. Sometimes he looks like me." His grin widened. "Sometimes he looks like your friend." As if summoned by the words, another figure emerged from the darkness behind Bernard. Jake, still wearing that horrible, unnatural smile. "Found you," he said, his voice still that flat, wrong tone. "Time to meet him properly." I backed away, pulling Nora with me. We were outnumbered now, trapped between Jake and Bernard on the narrow forest trail. "The old hunting cabin," Bernard said to Jake, pointing off into the trees. "That's where he's waiting, where the veil is thinnest." Jake nodded, then lunged forward with that unnatural speed. I tried to dodge, but he anticipated my movement, grabbing my arm in a grip so tight I felt bones grind together. "Let him go," Nora screamed, beating at Jake's back with her fists. Bernard moved with surprising agility for his apparent age, seizing Nora and pulling her away from Jake. "You'll get your turn, girl, but he goes first. Always been the order of things." Jake began dragging me off the trail into the thick undergrowth. I fought, kicking and twisting, but his strength was impossible, inhuman. "Nora, run!" I shouted. "Get to the ranger station." But looking back, I saw Bernard had a tight grip on her. One bony hand clamped over her mouth as he forced her to follow us into the trees. The whispers in my head grew louder as Jake dragged me deeper into the forest. No longer just a pressure or a vague direction, actual whispers now, though I couldn't make out the words. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rustling like the wind through leaves. We moved through the forest with unnatural ease, as if the undergrowth parted for us. Behind, I could hear Nora's muffled protests and Bernard's rasping encouragements as he forced her to follow. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, we broke into a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated cabin, far older than the one we'd stayed in. Its logs were blackened with age, the roof partially collapsed, vines and moss reclaiming the structure for the forest. "Home," Bernard announced, his voice reverent. Jake dragged me to the cabin's door, which hung askew on rusted hinges. The whispers in my head had reached a crescendo, almost deafening in their intensity. I could feel something waiting inside that cabin, a presence, old and patient and hungry. "Please," I begged, trying to appeal to whatever might be left of my friend. "Jake, if you're in there, fight this. Don't do this." For just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in Jake's eyes, a flash of confusion, of the real Jake struggling to surface. But then it was gone, replaced by that empty, ecstatic stare. "Sasquatch Tom will make everything clear," he said, shoving me through the doorway. The interior of the cabin was a single room, lit by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of tallow and something else, a musky animal smell that made the hairs on my neck stand up. At the center of the room stood a crude altar made from a large flat stone placed atop a tree stump. On it rested a collection of objects: animal bones, feathers, small carved figurines, and what looked disturbingly like human teeth. But it was what loomed behind the altar that made my blood freeze in my veins. A figure, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling beams. In the candlelight, I could make out a body covered in shaggy dark hair. Powerful limbs ending in hands with too many fingers, each tipped with a curved claw. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze upon me. Ancient, predatory, alien. Sasquatch Tom. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond to my commands. I could only stand there, paralyzed, as the monstrous figure stepped around the altar toward me. Behind me, I heard Nora being dragged into the cabin, her screams suddenly silenced as she too beheld the nightmare before us. "We brought them, just like you asked," Bernard said, his voice quivering with excitement. "Fresh minds, open to the whispers." The creature made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a word, but something in between. I felt it reverberate in my chest, in my mind. Yes, Bernard responded, as if he understood. The woman for the vessel, the man for the knowing. Jake stepped forward, that unnatural grin still fixed on his face. I did good, didn't I? I brought them, just like you wanted. The creature raised one of its misshapen hands and placed it on Jake's head. Jake's eyes rolled back, his body shuddering with apparent ecstasy. What are you going to do to us? Nora's voice, small and terrified, broke the silence. Bernard turned to her, his pale eyes glinting in the candlelight. Sasquatch. Tom needs new vessels. Bodies wear out, you see. Mine's too. He's been wearing me for 30 years, but I'm old now. Failing. And your friend there? He nodded toward Jake. He's strong, but his mind was too rigid. Couldn't contain all of Tom. Just fragments. Enough to bring you here. My paralysis was beginning to fade, replaced by cold, clear terror. You're saying this thing is going to possess us? Bernard's smile widened. Smart boy. Yes. He'll wear your woman like a glove. And you'll receive the knowing. All of it. Everything Sasquatch Tom has learned in his long, long life. The creature, Tom, moved closer to Nora, reaching for her with those 2 long fingers. She shrank back against Bernard's hold, tears streaming down her face. No, I shouted, finally finding my voice again. Take me instead. Leave her alone. Tom paused, his shadowed face turning toward me. I still couldn't make out his features clearly, but I had the impression of too many eyes, arranged all wrong. Bernard looked startled. That's not how it works. The woman becomes the vessel. The man receives the knowing. That's how it's always been. Why? I demanded. Playing for time, desperately trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. Why does it have to be that way? Bernard hesitated, uncertainty crossing his weathered face. Because that's how Tom wants it. Women are more receptive to the wearing. Men more suited to the knowing. I forced a laugh, harsh and bitter. That's sexist bullshit, and you know it. Gender has nothing to do with receptivity to whatever this is. If your Tom is so ancient and knowing, he should understand that. Bernard looked confused, glancing between me and the creature as if seeking guidance. Tom had gone very still, that shadowed face still turned toward me. I pressed my advantage. I'm volunteering. I'm receptive. I want to be the vessel. Isn't willingness worth something? Marcus, no, Nora whispered, horrified. But I could see I had thrown them off balance. Bernard's grip on Nora had loosened in his confusion, and even Jake seemed less certain, that unnatural grin faltering. Tom made that sound again, that not quite growl, not quite word. Bernard's eyes widened. He says you're right, the old man said, sounding astonished. He says willingness makes for a stronger bond, less resistance, less wear on the vessel. Tom moved toward me now, those too many-fingered hands reaching for my face. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. This was my gamble, my only chance to save Nora. Let her go first, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let her leave the cabin. Then I'm all yours. Bernard frowned. That wasn't the deal. Tom made another sound, sharper this time, and Bernard fell silent immediately. The creature nodded its shaggy head once. Agreement. Bernard released Nora, who stumbled forward, catching herself on the edge of the altar. Marcus, don't do this, she pleaded. Don't sacrifice yourself for me. It's okay, I told her, never taking my eyes off Tom. Just get out of here. Get help. Go back to the trail. Find the ranger station. I won't leave you, she insisted. You have to, I said. It's the only way either of us has a chance. Tom made an impatient sound, one clawed hand gesturing toward the door. The message was clear. Nora should go. Now. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face. Then she lunged forward, pressing something into my hand, cold metal, the prescription bottle from the cabin, before backing toward the door. "I'll come back for you," she promised, then turned and fled into the night. As soon as she was gone, Tom moved with blinding speed, seizing me by the throat and lifting me off my feet. I gasped for air, clawing at the hairy arm that held me. The shadowed face leaned close to mine, and finally I could see what lay beneath. Not a face at all, just darkness, swirling like smoke, with points of light that might have been eyes scattered throughout, a void wearing the rough shape of a man. "What do you want from me?" I choked out. The darkness seemed to pulse, to reach toward me. I felt pressure in my head, like something trying to push its way in. The whispers returned louder than before, and now I could almost understand them, almost hear the words. With my free hand, I fumbled with the prescription bottle Nora had given me, managing to pop the cap off. In a desperate move, I flung the pills directly into that swirling void of a face. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. Tom reeled back, dropping me to the floor. A high-pitched keening sound filled the cabin, making my ears ring and my teeth vibrate in their sockets. The creature clutched at its non-face, the darkness roiling and churning like a storm cloud. "What have you done?" Bernard screamed, rushing to Tom's side. "What have you done?" I didn't wait to find out. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door, barreling past a confused-looking Jake who seemed caught between two states of mind. "Jake, come on!" I shouted, grabbing his arm as I passed. For a moment he resisted. Then something cleared in his eyes and he followed me out into the night. We ran blindly through the forest, the sounds of Bernard's enraged screams and Tom's unnatural keening fading behind us. Jake stumbled alongside me, shaking his head repeatedly as if trying to clear it. What happened?" he gasped as we ran. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Later," I panted. "Just run." We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces. I had no idea if we were heading in the right direction, only that we needed to put as much distance as possible between us and that cabin. After what felt like an eternity, we broke onto a trail. Not the one we'd been on earlier, but definitely man-made. Jake collapsed to his knees, heaving for breath. "I remember. Pieces," he said between gasps. Something in my head, whispering, making me do things. "Oh God, is Nora?" "She got away," I assured him, leaning against a tree for support. "At least, I hope she did." My phone was somehow still in my pocket. I pulled it out, praying for a signal. One bar, weak, but there. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to explain our situation as coherently as possible. 3 hikers, 1 missing, strange cult activity in the Chattahoochee National Forest near Chattooga Ridge. I wasn't sure how much they believed, but they promised to send rangers and police to search the area. "What did you give that thing?" Jake asked after I hung up. "When it had you by the throat." "Risperidone," I replied. "The antipsychotic medication we found in the cabin. Nora slipped it to me before she left." "Smart," Jake nodded. "If that entity was influencing our minds somehow, an antipsychotic might interfere with the connection." We waited on the trail, jumping at every sound in the darkness, until finally, flashlight beams cut through the night, rangers accompanied by sheriff's deputies, and Nora, her face tear-streaked but determined. She rushed to us, throwing her arms around both Jake and me. "You're alive. You're both alive." The next few hours passed in a blur. We were escorted back to the ranger station, given blankets, hot coffee, and medical attention for our cuts and bruises. We told our story, or a version of it. A mentally ill man living in the woods, drugging hikers, conducting strange rituals. We didn't mention the impossible creature with too many fingers and a face of darkness. We didn't mention the whispers that I could still faintly hear at the edges of my consciousness. The authorities organized a search party to find Bernard and his cabin, but I wasn't optimistic. Something told me that the clearing, the cabin, perhaps even Bernard himself, would be gone without a trace. 3 days later, after we'd given statements and been cleared to leave, I sat with Nora and Jake in a diner in Clayton, the nearest town. Jake seemed almost back to normal, though sometimes I caught him tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. "They found something," Nora said, sliding her phone across the table to us. A local news article about the search in the Chattahoochee National Forest. Authorities discovered an abandoned hunting cabin matching the description provided by the hikers. Inside, they found evidence of long-term habitation and what Sheriff Donaldson described as concerning ritualistic items. No suspect has been apprehended, but rangers are increasing patrols in the area and warning hikers to exercise caution. "Do you think he's gone?" Jake asked quietly. "Bernard and the other one." I thought about the whispers, fainter now but still present. About the dreams I'd been having, dreams of darkness and ancient knowledge, and of a consciousness vast and alien trying to communicate with me. "No," I said honestly, "I don't think they're gone, just waiting, looking for new vessels." Nora reached across the table, taking my hand, but we stopped them, this time at least. I nodded, not telling her about the whispers, about how sometimes, in unguarded moments, I felt that pull again, that urge to go back into the forest, to seek out the place where the veil was thinnest. "We should go public with the full story," Jake suggested. "Tell people what really happened. Warn them." "Who would believe us?" I asked. "We'd sound as crazy as Bernard." We fell silent, each lost in our own thoughts. The diner around us bustled with normal life, families eating breakfast, truckers stopping for coffee, tourists planning their day in the mountains. None of them knew what lurked in the forests just miles away. "We're going to need to stick together," Nora finally said, her voice firm despite the slight tremor I could detect. "Whatever happened to us out there, I don't think it's over." Jake nodded, absently rubbing his temples. "I still feel off, like there's an echo in my head. Sometimes I'll be doing something completely normal and suddenly get this flash of that cabin, that thing." I knew exactly what he meant, but I didn't say so. Instead, I sipped my coffee and stared out the window at the mountains in the distance, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere in those ancient forests, Sasquatch Tom was waiting, and somehow I knew he was waiting specifically for me. "We should leave," I said suddenly. "Get as far from here as possible." Nora's hand tightened around mine. "Will that help? Or will the whispers just follow us?" I had no answer for that. The truth was, I didn't know if we could ever truly escape what had happened in those woods. The experience had marked us somehow, changed us in ways I was only beginning to understand. "One thing's for sure," Jake said, some of his old determination returning to his voice. "We're never going hiking again." That drew a weak laugh from both Nora and me, breaking the tension momentarily. We finished our meal, paid, and walked out to Jake's SUV. Our plan was to drive back to Atlanta, back to our regular lives and routines, to pretend as much as possible that our camping trip had been nothing more than a bad dream. As we pulled out of the diner parking lot, I glanced back at those misty mountains one last time. For just a moment, I thought I saw a tall, shaggy figure standing at the tree line, too distant to make out clearly. Then Jake turned onto the highway, and the mountains disappeared from view. That should have been the end of our story. 3 friends who had a terrifying experience in the wilderness, who escaped with their lives and their sanity mostly intact, who went back to their jobs and apartments and tried to forget. But the whispers didn't stop. For me, they grew stronger each night. In my dreams, I returned to that cabin, to the altar with its grisly decorations, to the creature with the void for a face. In these dreams, Tom would speak to me, not in whispers but in a voice that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and resonate directly in my mind. He spoke of ancient things, of knowledge buried and forgotten, of powers that slumbered beneath the earth, and he spoke of hunger, a hunger that could only be satisfied by wearing a willing vessel. I started losing time. I would be sitting at my desk at work, coding, and suddenly find myself standing in my apartment, hours later with no memory of how I'd gotten there. I would discover strange drawings among my papers, crude sketches of a cabin, of a tall, shaggy figure, of an altar covered in bones and teeth. I didn't tell Nora or Jake about any of this. We still met for coffee occasionally, but our conversations were stilted, awkward, filled with the weight of things unsaid. Jake seemed to be recovering, the echo in his head fading with time. And Nora. Nora was worried about me. I could see it in her eyes and the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. 1 month after our return, I came home from work to find her sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. Her hair was pulled back in that same messy ponytail from the hiking trip, and for a moment, I was transported back to the forest, to the moment before everything went wrong. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. I let her in, clearing takeout containers from my coffee table to make space. My apartment was a mess. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry unfolded, paperwork scattered everywhere. I hadn't been taking care of things lately, hadn't been taking care of myself. Nora noticed, her eyes taking in the chaos, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she placed a folder on the table between us. "I've been doing research," she said, "about Sasquatch Tom, about the Chattooga Ridge area." I stared at the folder, feeling a mixture of dread and that strange, insistent pull that had been growing within me. "Why?" "Because I needed to understand what happened to us," she replied. "And because you're not okay. Marcus, I can see it. Whatever that thing did to you in that cabin, it's not over." I couldn't deny it. "What did you find?" She opened the folder, revealing printouts of old newspaper articles, photocopied pages from books, and handwritten notes. "There have been disappearances in that area going back over 100 years. Hikers, campers, even locals sometimes. They go into the woods and never come out, or they come back, changed." She showed me a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1912. Local man returns after missing for 3 weeks, claims to have met Forest Devil. The article described how a logger named Thomas Blackwell had vanished while working in the Chattahoochee Forest. When he returned, he was babbling about a creature that had shown him wonders and horrors beyond mortal comprehension. He claimed the entity had called itself Sasquatch Tom and had offered him knowledge in exchange for service. Blackwell disappeared again a week later and was never found. "And look at this," Nora said, showing me another article, this one from 1967. "Missing hiker found. 3 companions still unaccounted for a group of 4 college students had gone backpacking in the area. 3 weeks later, only one returned, a young woman named Ellen Carter. She claimed her friends had been taken by the forest after they encountered an old hermit who called himself Bernard. The search for the missing students was eventually abandoned." "It's been happening for generations," Nora said quietly. "This entity, whatever it is, it takes people, uses them, and then discards them when they're no longer useful." "Bernard," I murmured. "He said Tom had been wearing him for 30 years. Nora nodded. "I think this thing, this Sasquatch Tom, needs human vessels to interact with our world. It wears them until they burn out, then finds new ones." "And now it wants me," I said, the words feeling heavy and terrible but undeniably true. Her hand found mine across the table. "I won't let that happen." "How can you stop it? How can anyone stop it?" I gestured to the pile of papers. "If this has been going on for a century or more, how do we fight something like that?" Nora reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've been talking to people. Experts in folklore, in the occult, people who study the kinds of things most of us pretend don't exist." She opened the pouch, revealing a small bundle of dried herbs tied with red thread, a smooth stone with strange markings etched into its surface, and a small vial of clear liquid. "Protection," she explained. barriers against mental influence. The herbs are supposed to clear your mind of external control. The stone is an anchor to keep you grounded in this reality. And the liquid, she hesitated, it's blessed water from a local church. Under other circumstances, I might have scoffed at such things. But after what I'd seen in those woods, I was beyond skepticism. I reached for the items, but as my fingers neared them, a sharp pain lanced through my head. The whispers, usually at the edges of my consciousness, suddenly rose to a deafening roar. I jerked back, clutching my temples. I can't. It doesn't want me to touch them. Alarm flashed across Nora's face. It's worse than I thought. The connection is stronger. What do we do? I asked. My voice strained as I fought against the pain and the whispers. Nora looked at me, determination hardening her features. We go back. Back to the forest. The mere suggestion sent a wave of both terror and longing through me. Why would we ever go back there? Because we need to end this, she said firmly. Not just for us, but for everyone who might come after. This thing has been preying on people for too long. And how exactly do we end an ancient forest entity? I demanded. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I know we can't run from it. You've been trying that and it's not working, and She hesitated, then forged ahead. I can't stand by and watch it consume you piece by piece. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was crazy for even suggesting we return to that nightmare. But deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't going to stop on its own. The whispers, the lost time, the dreams, they were only getting stronger. Eventually, they would overwhelm me completely. What about Jake? I asked. I haven't told him yet, Nora said. I wanted to talk to you first. He might not want to go back. He seems to be getting better. Nora nodded. It's his choice. But I think he deserves to know what we're planning. He was part of this too. We called Jake that evening and asked him to meet us. When we told him our plan to return to Chattooga Ridge to confront Sasquatch Tom, his face went pale. You're both insane, he said flatly. We barely escaped with our lives last time. Why would you want to go back? Because it's not over, I said, showing him the strange drawings I'd been creating unconsciously. It's still in my head, Jake, getting stronger every day. Then see a psychiatrist, he argued. Take medication. Don't go looking for the thing that nearly killed us. It's not in my head, I insisted. Or rather, it is, but not the way you're thinking. This is real, Jake. You know it's real. You were there. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn between concern and fear. Even if you're right, what makes you think you can stop it? This thing has apparently been around for centuries. We have to try, Nora said simply. If we don't, Marcus will keep getting worse, and eventually Tom will come for new vessels anyway. Maybe next time it will be a family with kids, or someone who doesn't know what they're dealing with. Jake was silent for a long moment, studying both of us. Finally, he sighed. You're really going to do this, aren't you? With or without me? We both nodded. Then I'm coming too, he said reluctantly. Someone has to be the voice of reason in this insanity. We spent the next week preparing. Nora continued her research, gathering more protective items and information about confronting supernatural entities. I tried to resist the whispers, to maintain my grip on reality, though it became harder each day. Jake, ever practical, focused on the logistics, supplies, equipment, maps of the area. We decided to return on the full moon, which Nora's research suggested might weaken the veil between our world and whatever realm Sasquatch Tom originated from. That would make the entity stronger, but also more vulnerable, more fully manifested in our reality, and thus subject to its rules and limitations. The night before our departure, I dreamt of the cabin again, but this time it was different. The altar was gone, replaced by a circle of stones. In the center stood Sasquatch Tom, but he no longer wore the form of a shaggy, Bigfoot-like creature. Instead, he appeared as a man, tall and gaunt with Bernard's white beard but my eyes. When he spoke, it was with a voice that was both Bernard's rasp and my own tenor. "I am waiting," he said. "Come home, Marcus. Come claim the knowing that is your birthright." I woke gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. Soaked. For a moment, I lay there, trembling with the certainty that we were making a terrible mistake, that we were walking willingly into the jaws of a predator far older and more cunning than we could possibly comprehend. But what choice did we have? The next morning, we loaded Jake's SUV and began the drive back to Chattooga Ridge. None of us spoke much during the journey, each lost in our own thoughts and fears. I watched the city give way to suburbs, then to rolling countryside, and finally to the looming ancient mountains of North Georgia. With each mile, the whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. We arrived at the trailhead in the early afternoon, the same place we'd started our ill-fated hiking trip just over a month ago. It looked so normal, so innocent. A simple gravel parking lot at the edge of the forest, a weathered wooden sign marking the beginning of the trail. "Are we really doing this?" Jake asked as we shouldered our packs. "We're really doing this," Nora confirmed, her expression resolute. I said nothing, already feeling the pull of the forest, the whispers guiding me like an invisible thread connected to my core. I knew with absolute certainty that I could find my way back to that clearing, to that cabin, no matter how hidden it might be. We set off along the trail, moving at a steady pace. The forest seemed to close around us, the canopy filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns that danced across the path. Birds called overhead, insects buzzed in the undergrowth, all perfectly normal sounds of a healthy forest. And yet, beneath it all, I could sense something watching, waiting. As the afternoon wore on, I began to recognize landmarks from our previous trip. A distinctive lightning-struck tree, a small stream crossing, a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the valley below. We were following the same route, but somehow it felt different, as if the forest itself had shifted slightly, rearranging itself around us. "We should reach the Chattooga Ridge cabin before nightfall," Jake said, consulting his map. "We can rest there, then continue to wherever we need to go in the morning." I shook my head. "We're not going to the cabin. We need to go directly to Tom." "In the dark?" Jake protested. "That's suicide." "Marcus is right," Nora said, surprising both of us. "We came here for a purpose. Delaying won't help." As if to punctuate her words, the whispers in my head suddenly intensified, becoming a physical sensation, a tugging behind my sternum, pulling me off the trail and into the dense forest to our right. "This way," I said, already stepping into the undergrowth. "Marcus, wait," Jake began, but I was already moving, following the pull with single-minded determination. I heard them scrambling after me, branches snapping, Nora calling my name. But I couldn't stop. The whispers had become a siren song, drowning out everything else. I moved through the forest with unnatural ease, as if the trees and bushes were parting for me, creating a path where none existed before. Time seemed to blur. The forest darkened around us as the sun sank behind the mountains, but I pressed on, guided by that insistent pull. Behind me, I could hear Jake and Nora struggling to keep up, their flashlight beams bouncing erratically through the trees. And then, suddenly, I broke through into a clearing. The clearing. The dilapidated cabin stood exactly as I remembered it, candlelight flickering through its broken windows. The pull was almost painful now, a physical sensation like a hook embedded in my chest, drawing me inexorably forward. Nora and Jake burst into the clearing moments later, breathing hard from the exertion of following my relentless pace. "My God," Jake whispered, staring at the cabin. "It's real. I half convinced myself we'd imagined it." Nora moved to my side, her hand slipping into mine. I could feel her trembling slightly, but her grip was firm, grounding. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though okay was far from what I was feeling. The whispers had become a constant roar in my head, the pull so strong it took physical effort to remain standing still. "He's waiting for us," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "For me." "We stick together," Jake said firmly, moving to my other side. "No matter what happens in there, we don't separate." Nora pulled the protective items from her bag: the herb bundle, the marked stone, the vial of blessed water. She pressed the stone into my palm, closing my fingers around it. This time, though the whispers protested, I was able to hold it. "Remember who you are," she said, her eyes locked with mine. "Whatever happens in there, whatever you see or hear, remember that you are Marcus Wheeler, not a vessel, not a tool for something else to use." I nodded, clutching the stone tightly. Its cool surface seemed to pulse against my skin, providing a small counterpoint to the insistent pull of the whispers. "Let's finish this," I said. Together, we approached the cabin. The door hung open, swinging slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. Inside, the candles burned just as they had in my dreams and memories, casting long shadows across the warped wooden floor. The altar was there, but now it was encircled by stones, just as in my dream. And waiting beside it, his pale eyes gleaming in the candlelight, stood Bernard. "You came back," he said, his thin lips stretching into that unnatural smile. "I knew you would." "Where is he?" I demanded. "Where's Sasquatch Tom?" Bernard's smile widened. "All around us. Within you, most of all. You've been carrying a piece of him since you left, haven't you, boy? Feeling the whispers, the pull." "We came to end this," Nora declared, her voice stronger than I expected. "To stop him from taking any more people." Bernard laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "End this? You can't end what has no beginning. Tom has always been here, will always be here. Part of the forest, part of the earth itself." "Then we'll settle for stopping him from hurting anyone else," Jake said, moving slightly in front of us protectively. Bernard's eyes flicked to him, narrowing. "You're empty now. He's released you. Why did you come back?" "For my friends," Jake replied simply. Bernard shook his head as if Jake had said something foolish. "Friendship means nothing to Tom. Knowledge is all that matters. The knowing, the wearing." As he spoke, the air in the cabin seemed to thicken, to darken. Shadows gathered in the corners, coalescing, taking shape. The whispers in my head reached a fever pitch and I staggered, the stone in my hand suddenly burning hot. "He comes," Bernard said, his voice reverent. The darkness gathered behind the altar, rising, forming that terrible familiar silhouette. Too tall, too many fingers, a void for a face. Sasquatch. Tom had manifested fully now, looming over us all, a presence so ancient and alien that the air itself seemed to recoil from his form. "What do you want from me?" I gasped, fighting to stay upright as the pull threatened to drag me to my knees. The void shifted, those points of light that might have been eyes focusing on me. When the answer came, it wasn't in words, but in images, impressions, emotions, a form of communication so alien that my mind struggled to process it. Loneliness, ancientness, hunger for connection, need for a bridge between worlds. I understood in that moment what Bernard had meant by the knowing. Tom wasn't just seeking a vessel to wear, he was seeking understanding, to be known, comprehended by human mind, to bridge the vast gulf between his consciousness and ours. "Why me?" I asked, the words barely audible over the roar in my head. Receptivity, openness, strength. More impressions flooded my mind, glimpses of other humans throughout the centuries who had stood where I now stood, who had been chosen as I had been chosen. Some had fled, some had fought, some had submitted willingly, accepting the knowing, becoming vessels for fragments of Tom's consciousness. None had survived intact. I felt Nora's hand tighten around mine, anchoring me. "Don't listen to it, Marcus. It's trying to manipulate you." Bernard stepped forward, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. The girl doesn't understand. She can't. But you can, Marcus. You can be more than just a temporary vessel. You can be a true partnership, the first in centuries. The void that was Tom's face seemed to pulse in agreement. I felt the offer hanging in the air between us. Knowledge, power, a communion with something vast and ancient. All I had to do was accept. All I had to do was let go. For a moment, I wavered. The pull was so strong, the whispers so seductive. What might I learn? What might I become if I surrendered to this entity? Then I felt Nora press something else into my hand, the vial of blessed water. "Remember who you are," she whispered again. Jake moved closer, his shoulder touching mine. "We're with you, Marcus, whatever you decide." Their presence, their touch, broke through the fog of whispers. I looked at Bernard, truly looked at him for the first time, saw the emptiness in his pale eyes, the way his skin hung loose on his frame, the unnatural angles of his posture, saw what became of those who accepted the knowing. "No," I said, my voice gaining strength as I made my decision. "I won't be your vessel. I won't accept your knowing." Bernard's face contorted with anger. "You don't have a choice, boy. He's already in your head, already part of you." "You're wrong," I said, stepping forward, the stone in one hand, the vial in the other. "I always have a choice, and I choose to be human, to be myself." Tom's form seemed to flicker, the void swirling more rapidly. I felt pressure building in my head, pain lancing behind my eyes as the entity pushed harder against the barriers of my mind. I uncapped the vial and flung the contents at the darkness. The water hissed on contact, steam rising where it touched the void. Tom recoiled, a high-pitched keening filling the cabin. Bernard lunged at me with surprising speed, his bony fingers reaching for my throat. Jake intercepted him, tackling the old man to the ground. They grappled on the floor, Bernard's strength belying his emaciated appearance. Nora pulled out the herb bundle, striking a match and setting it ablaze. Pungent smoke filled the cabin as she began to recite something, words in a language I didn't recognize, but which seemed to make the air vibrate around us. The pressure in my head intensified, becoming almost unbearable. I felt as if my skull might split open from the force of Tom's attempts to invade my mind. The whispers became screams, unintelligible but filled with rage and desperation. I staggered to the altar, pushing past the pain, clutching the marked stone so tightly that its edges cut into my palm. Blood welled around the stone, coating its strange markings. In that moment, something shifted. The stone grew warmer, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The screams in my head faltered, replaced by something that might have been surprise, might have been fear. I placed the bloodied stone on the altar, at the center of the circle of stones. An understanding was forming in my mind, not from the whispers but from somewhere deeper, more instinctual. "You're bound to this place," I said, looking up at the swirling void that was Tom's face. "To this forest, this clearing, this cabin. You need vessels to reach beyond it, to experience the world outside your boundaries." The void pulsed, neither confirming nor denying. "But you're vulnerable here too," I continued, "more fully in our world, subject to its rules and limitations." I looked down at the bloodied stone, including blood magic, the oldest kind of binding. Bernard had gone still in Jake's grip, his pale eyes wide with alarm. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "Ending this," I replied. "Not destroying Tom. I don't think anything can destroy something that ancient. But binding him, limiting him, ensuring he can never take another unwilling vessel." The pressure in my head redoubled, Tom's fury manifesting as physical pain. Blood began to trickle from my nose, my ears, but I stood my ground, one hand on the bloodied stone, the other reaching out to Nora. She grasped my hand, her own bloody from a cut she'd made across her palm. She extended her other hand to Jake, who had pinned Bernard to the floor. After a moment's hesitation, Jake released the old man and took Nora's hand, completing our circle around the altar. "By our blood, freely given," Nora intoned, her voice strong despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "By our will, freely asserted. We bind you to this place. We bind you from taking what is not offered." The keening sound from Tom grew louder, the darkness of his form writhing like a thing in agony. The candles around the cabin flared impossibly high, then guttered out, plunging us into darkness. In that darkness, something changed. The pressure in my head eased, then disappeared entirely. The whispers fell silent for the first time since that night in the cabin a month ago. For a moment, we stood frozen, uncertain. Then Nora's flashlight clicked on, illuminating the cabin once more. The altar remained, the bloodied stone still at its center. But the darkness that had been Sasquatch Tom was gone. And Bernard. Bernard lay on the floor where Jake had pinned him, his eyes open but empty, his chest still. "Is he?" Nora asked, her voice small in the sudden silence. Jake knelt beside the old man, checking for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up and nodded grimly. "He's gone." Tom was keeping him alive, I realized, without the entity inside him. We stood in silence, absorbing what had happened. The cabin felt different now, just an old abandoned structure in the woods, with no sense of that ancient presence that had filled it before. "Did it work?" Jake finally asked. "Is it over?" I reached inward, searching for any trace of the whispers, the pull. Nothing. My mind felt clear, empty of anything but my own thoughts. "I think so," I said cautiously. "I think we bound him to this place. He can't reach out anymore, can't pull people in through the whispers, can't wear vessels beyond this clearing." "But he's still here," Nora said, looking around the cabin uneasily. I nodded. "He's still here, and maybe someday, someone will come looking for him. Someone who wants the knowing, who offers themselves willingly." I looked down at Bernard's body. "But they'll know what they're agreeing to now, what the price is." We buried Bernard at the edge of the clearing, marking his grave with a simple pile of stones. It seemed wrong to leave him there, but we couldn't carry his body out of the forest. And somehow, I felt he would have wanted to remain near Tom, the entity he had served for so long. As dawn broke, we made our way back to the trail, back to Jake's SUV, back to civilization. None of us spoke much during the journey home. What was there to say? We had confronted something ancient and terrible, something beyond human understanding. We had survived, but we were changed, marked by the experience in ways that would never fully fade. 1 month later, I sat in a coffee shop with Nora and Jake, watching steam rise from my cup. We'd fallen into a routine of weekly meetings, checking in with each other, reassuring ourselves that the nightmares were just nightmares, that the whispers remained silent. "I read something interesting yesterday," Nora said, breaking the comfortable silence between us, "about the etymology of the name Sasquatch Tom." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "Oh?" "Most people think it comes from Bigfoot legends, but it might be older," she explained. "There are records from the Cherokee who lived in that area, stories about a spirit they called Tsul Kalu, the slant-eyed giant, a powerful being who lived in the mountains and could give knowledge to those who sought him out." "But at a price," Jake added. Nora nodded. "Always at a price." I sipped my coffee thinking about Bernard, about the emptiness in his eyes at the end, about the knowledge he'd gained and what it had cost him. "Do you ever wonder?" Jake began, then hesitated. "What?" I prompted. "Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing? Binding it, instead of trying to destroy it completely?" I thought about this for a moment. I don't think we could have destroyed it. Not something that old, that powerful. And maybe... I struggled to articulate the feeling that had been growing in me over the past month. Maybe it has a right to exist. It's part of the forest, part of the mountains. It was there long before us and will be there long after. It's nature to seek connection, to hunger for vessels. That doesn't make what it did any less horrific, Nora pointed out. No, I agreed. It doesn't. That's why binding it was necessary, limiting it. But destroying it entirely? I shook my head. That would be like trying to destroy the forest itself. We fell silent again, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside the coffee shop window, life in Atlanta continued. Cars passing, people walking, all blissfully unaware of what lurked in the mountains just hours away. Unaware of the ancient entity bound to a clearing in the Chattahoochee National Forest, still whispering, still waiting for someone to answer, but the whispers couldn't reach us anymore, couldn't reach anyone who didn't deliberately seek them out. And that, I thought, would have to be enough. For now, at least my name is Marcus Wheeler, I am still myself, and the forest has gone quiet. My name is Marcus Reeves, and I am 34 years old. This happened in August 2024. The crisp morning air stung my lungs as I surveyed the trailhead map at the entrance to the Cohutta Wilderness area in northern Georgia. This corner of the Chattahoochee National Forest was exactly what I needed. Over 35,000 acres of pristine, dense forest with minimal human interference. 6 months had passed since the divorce, and I was still walking around with a hollowness in my chest that nothing seemed to fill. Ready, buddy? I glanced down at Rusty, my 3-year-old German Shepherd mix, who was eagerly sniffing at the base of a nearby white oak. His copper-colored coat shimmered in the morning light as he turned to me, tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. Getting Rusty had been one of the few good decisions I'd made during my marriage to Elaine. He was the only thing from those 7 years that I fought to keep. I adjusted my pack, feeling the comforting weight of 5 days' worth of supplies pressing against my back. The Jacks River Trail was supposed to be challenging but rewarding. 18 miles of backcountry hiking with multiple river crossings and isolated campsites. Perfect for someone looking to get lost for a while. I'd chosen Cohutta deliberately, drawn by online forums describing how the deeper sections of the wilderness had spotty cell reception at best. The thought of being unreachable was intoxicating. No more late-night texts from Elaine asking for the garage door opener code she'd never bothered to memorize. No more pitying check-ins from friends who had quietly chosen sides after the split. "Let's go," I said to Rusty, and we began our descent into the valley. The first few miles passed pleasantly enough. The trail followed a ridge before dropping into the valley where the Jacks River flowed. The forest was alive with early August warmth, humid but not oppressive, with golden light filtering through the dense canopy of oak, hickory, and pine. Birds called overhead, and twice we startled white-tailed deer that bounded gracefully away through the underbrush. Rusty stayed close, occasionally darting off to investigate an interesting scent before returning to my side. He was well trained for backcountry hiking, a necessity after the incident in the Smokies last year when he'd nearly tumbled off a steep embankment chasing after a squirrel. As we descended deeper into the valley, I noticed the forest growing denser, the light struggling more to reach the forest floor. By early afternoon, we'd reached our first river crossing. The Jacks River wasn't particularly wide here, maybe 20 feet across, but the current looked swift over slippery rocks. "Stay close," I commanded Rusty as I stepped carefully into the water. It was bracingly cold even in August, rushing around my calves as I tested each foothold before committing my weight. We made it across without incident and continued deeper into the wilderness. The trail grew fainter, requiring more attention to follow as it wound through dense rhododendron thickets that sometimes formed tunnels overhead. The humid air felt increasingly close and still. According to my map, there was a suitable camping area another 2 miles ahead near the river, which would make a good first night's stop. The isolation was already working its magic. My mind felt clearer than it had in months, focused only on the immediate concerns of navigation, hydration, and the rhythmic placement of one foot in front of the other. Around 5 in the afternoon, the trail emerged into a small clearing beside the river. A flat area beneath a stand of towering hemlocks would make an ideal tent site. I shrugged off my pack with a groan of relief and began setting up camp while Rusty explored the perimeter, his tail wagging contentedly. As I worked, I noticed something odd about the clearing. There were no signs of previous campers. No old fire rings, no trampled grass, not even the occasional bit of forgotten trash that mars even the most remote wilderness sites. It was as if no one had ever stopped here before, despite this being an obvious and appealing spot. "Just means we have good taste, right, boy?" I said to Rusty, who had returned to flop down on the soft pine needle floor beside my half-erected tent. With camp established, I filtered water from the river and prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated beef stew. As I ate, I watched the light fade through the trees. The forest grew quiet as night approached, but not in the way I expected. There was an absence of the usual evening sounds. No frogs, no insects, no rustling of nocturnal creatures beginning their nightly routines. Just silence, broken only by the constant gurgle of the river. I built a small fire more for comfort than necessity in the August heat. The flames caught quickly on the dry kindling, but as they grew, I noticed they seemed to cast strangely short shadows, as if the darkness beyond our little circle of light was somehow denser, absorbing the illumination. "Just tired eyes," I muttered to myself. Rusty had curled up near the fire but wasn't sleeping. His eyes remained open, alert, occasionally scanning the tree line. I attributed his behavior to the unfamiliar surroundings. This was his first multi-day backcountry trip, after all. Night descended fully, and with it came a profound darkness I hadn't experienced in years of wilderness travel. Even on moonless nights, there's usually some ambient light from stars, but here it seemed as if the forest canopy was unnaturally thick, blocking out everything but the most determined shafts of starlight. I doused the fire around 10 and crawled into my tent, Rusty following close behind. Despite the day's physical exertion, sleep eluded me. I lay awake listening to the river's constant flow, which somehow seemed louder in the darkness. Rusty was restless too, occasionally lifting his head as if hearing something I couldn't. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, running a hand through his fur. He whined softly but settled back down against my side. I must have drifted off eventually because I jerked awake suddenly, heart pounding. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then I felt Rusty pressed against me, his body rigid with tension. He was growling, a low, continuous rumble that I could feel vibrating through his body. I'd never heard him make that sound before. "Rusty, what's wrong?" I fumbled for my headlamp and switched it on. The beam cut weakly through the darkness of the tent. Rusty was facing the tent door, hackles raised, teeth bared. Outside, something moved past the tent, something large enough to disturb the air and make the rainfly flutter slightly. There was no sound of footsteps, just the sensation of a presence sliding by, almost like someone dragging something heavy. My hand instinctively went to the small canister of bear spray I kept in the tent pocket. Bears were common in this part of Georgia, though attacks were rare. But this didn't feel like a bear. The movement stopped directly in front of our tent. Rusty's growl intensified, and I placed a warning hand on his collar. If it was a bear, the last thing I wanted was for him to bolt out and provoke an attack. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, just the awareness that something was standing mere feet away, separated from us by only the thin fabric of the tent. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a smell seeped through the tent walls, a putrid, rotting odor like roadkill left too long in the summer sun, but with an underlying scent I can only describe as old. Ancient and wrong in a way that made my stomach clench. Rusty sneezed once, then resumed his growling, lower now but no less intense. I sat frozen, afraid that the beam of my headlamp might attract whatever was out there. The stench grew stronger, becoming so overpowering that I had to press my sleeve against my nose to keep from gagging. Then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, I felt a The smell began to fade. I sensed the presence moving away, back toward the tree line. Only when it seemed to have gone completely did Rusty's growling subside, though he remained alert, ears pricked forward. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Good boy." We stayed awake the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke, Rusty and I emerged cautiously from the tent. The clearing looked exactly as it had the evening before. No tracks, no disturbance, no sign that anything had visited us in the night. But something had. I was certain of it. I made coffee over a new fire, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. Maybe it had just been a curious black bear. That would explain the size and the smell, if not the strangeness of the encounter. As the caffeine cleared the fog from my mind, I decided to continue with my planned route. If the whatever it was had been dangerous, it would have tried to get into the tent, and in daylight with miles of trail ahead, the incident seemed less significant. We broke camp efficiently and were back on the Jacks River Trail by 8. The day was already warm and growing warmer, the humidity making my clothes stick to my skin almost immediately. The trail followed the river closely here, requiring several more crossings as we made our way deeper into the wilderness. Around midday, we reached a particularly beautiful section where the river tumbled over a series of rock ledges forming small waterfalls and crystal-clear pools. I decided to stop for lunch and maybe a quick swim to wash away the sweat and lingering unease. Rusty lapped eagerly at the cool water while I unpacked a simple lunch of jerky, trail mix, and an apple. As I sat on a sun-warmed rock watching minnows dart in the shallows, I felt my equilibrium returning. Last night had been unsettling, but in daylight the forest was beautiful, peaceful. After eating, I stripped down to my shorts and waded into one of the deeper pools. The water was bracingly cold, numbing my skin on contact. I ducked beneath the surface, letting the current wash over me, cleansing me of the previous night's fear. When I resurfaced, wiping water from my eyes, I noticed Rusty standing at the edge of the pool, staring intently at something upstream. Following his gaze, I saw nothing unusual, just the river continuing its journey through the forest, dappled sunlight playing on its surface. "What is it, boy?" I called, but he didn't respond, his attention fixed on whatever he perceived. I waded back to shore and dressed quickly, suddenly feeling exposed. As I laced up my boots, I noticed something odd about the river rocks scattered along the bank. Several of them had been arranged in a rough circle with a larger flat stone in the center. It might have been coincidence. Rocks naturally shift and settle, but the formation seemed deliberate. I approached cautiously. The center stone was different from the others, darker with unusual striations running through it, and there was something on it, something dark and organic. Leaning closer, my stomach lurched. It was a clump of hair, reddish-brown and coarse. Dog hair. It looked disconcertingly like Rusty's. I backed away quickly, calling Rusty to my side. He came reluctantly, still watching the upstream trail. I checked him over carefully, running my hands through his coat, looking for any missing patches. He seemed fine, coat intact, but I couldn't shake the sick feeling that had settled in my gut. "Let's move on," I said, more to myself than to Rusty. We continued downstream, but the easy rhythm of the morning was gone, replaced by a hyper-awareness of our surroundings. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush commanded my attention. The trail grew more challenging as the afternoon progressed, winding away from the river and up a steep, rocky slope. My legs burned with the exertion, and sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. Rusty stayed unusually close, occasionally whining softly. By the time we reached the ridgetop, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. According to my map, there was another suitable camping area about a mile ahead at a place called Bear Creek Gap. Despite the ominous name, it was marked as a popular spot with multiple established campsites. The thought of possibly encountering other hikers lifted my spirits somewhat. After last night and the disturbing find by the river, some human company would be welcome. As we approached Bear Creek Gap, however, my hopes faded. The area was deserted. There were signs of previous campers, fire rings, clear tent pads, even a crude log bench, but no current occupants. I checked my watch, 6:23 p.m. Not particularly late in the day, especially for August when daylight lasted well past 8. Where was everyone? With no better options, I began setting up camp in what appeared to be the most used site, situated on a small rise with good visibility in all directions. As I worked, Rusty remained unusually subdued, staying within a few feet of me at all times. With the tent established, I set about gathering firewood. Despite my unease, I was determined to have a substantial fire tonight. Bear Creek Gap was more open than our previous site, with fewer large trees and more scrubby underbrush. The reduced canopy cover meant better visibility of the night sky, which I hoped would alleviate some of the oppressive darkness we'd experienced the night before. As I gathered fallen branches from the edge of the clearing, I noticed something carved into the trunk of a massive old oak tree. Stepping closer, I saw it was a name: Eliza. Carved in rough, deep letters that had weathered and aged, below the name was a date, 1928. Nearly a century old then, probably the work of early hikers or local residents before the area became a designated wilderness. Still, something about the carving unsettled me, the depth of the cuts, as if they'd been made with desperate force. I returned to camp with an armload of wood and set about building a fire. As the flames grew, I prepared dinner, another dehydrated meal, this time pasta primavera that tasted only vaguely of the vegetables it claimed to contain. The sun set in a spectacular display of orange and pink, but with its departure came an almost palpable tension. Rusty refused his dinner, choosing instead to lie facing outward from the fire, his eyes constantly scanning the gathering darkness. I tried to focus on practical matters, filtering more water, organizing tomorrow's route, even reading a few pages of the paperback I'd brought along. But my attention kept straying to the deepening shadows beyond our campsite. The night sounds here were different from our previous location. Not silent, but wrong somehow. Bird calls that came at unusual intervals, wind through the trees that sounded almost like whispering voices. At one point, I clearly heard what sounded like footsteps on the trail we'd come up, the unmistakable crunch of boots on rocky soil. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" but received no answer. Rusty growled low in his throat, eyes fixed on the trail. I added more wood to the fire, building it higher than was strictly necessary. The dancing flames cast our shadows long against the surrounding trees, creating the unsettling impression that more than 2 figures occupied our small circle of light. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to turn in, more from a desire to be inside the illusory protection of the tent than from actual tiredness. I doused the fire carefully, then used my headlamp to guide us to the tent. Once inside, I left the headlamp on its lowest setting, creating a dim glow that barely illuminated the tent interior. Rusty pressed close against me, his body tense and alert. I kept the bear spray and my hunting knife close at hand, though what good they would do against the nameless unease that plagued me, I couldn't say. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by Rusty's occasional growls and my own racing thoughts. In the brief periods when I did sleep, I dreamed of being watched by countless eyes from the darkness between the trees. I awoke fully around 3 in the morning, instantly alert. Rusty was standing over me, his body rigid, a continuous low growl emanating from his throat. Outside the tent, something was moving. Not like the night before, not a single presence passing by, but what sounded like multiple entities circling our campsite. The footfalls were light but distinct, accompanied by a soft sliding sound, like fabric or skin, brushing against the underbrush. And there were voices, or at least, sounds that resembled voices. They came in whispers and murmurs, too faint to make out words but unmistakably communicative. They rose and fell in patterns that suggested conversation, but with cadences that felt wrong, inhuman. I lay paralyzed, straining to understand what I was hearing. The whispers grew closer, then receded, as if whatever was out there was pacing the perimeter of our sight. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds had been, pregnant with anticipation. A sharp crack broke the silence, a stick snapping directly outside the tent. Then another, closer to the door. Something was approaching deliberately, making no effort to mask its presence. Rusty's growl intensified, and I gripped his collar tightly, afraid he might lunge at the tent door. My other hand found the bear spray, though my fingers felt numb and distant, barely responding to my commands. A shadow fell across the tent, something blocking the meager starlight that filtered through the rainfly. The shape was roughly human in outline but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at odd angles. Then a voice spoke. Not a whisper this time, but clear and distinct, directly outside the tent door. "Marcus!" My name spoken in a voice that was almost but not quite like Elaine's. It had her cadence, her slight southern drawl, but distorted as if filtered through water or dense smoke. "Marcus, let me in. I'm cold out here." My blood turned to ice. How could anything out here know my name? And why would it choose to mimic my ex-wife's voice? "Marcus, please, don't you recognize me?" Rusty's growl became a snarl, spittle flying from his bared teeth. I could barely hold him back. "She's waiting for you," the voice said, dropping any pretense of being Elaine, becoming something older and raw. "Eliza's been waiting so long." The name from the tree carving. My mind raced, trying to connect these disparate elements into something that made sense. "She's lonely down there, Marcus, in the cold, dark water." A new sound then, a rhythmic scratching against the tent fabric. Long, deliberate strokes, like fingernails or claws dragging slowly from top to bottom. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Primal fear had overtaken any capacity for rational thought. The scratching stopped. Then, horrifically, the tent zipper began to move upward, slowly, inch by inch, as if being manipulated by uncertain fingers. Rusty lunged forward, breaking free from my grip. In the same instant, operating on pure instinct, I aimed the bear spray at the widening gap and emptied half the canister in a single blast. A shriek pierced the night. Not angry, but pained. A sound of genuine agony that rose to an impossible pitch before cutting off abruptly. The shadow disappeared from the tent, and I heard something large crashing away through the underbrush. Rusty barked furiously, launching himself through the partially open tent door in pursuit. "Rusty, no!" I screamed, scrambling after him. By the time I extricated myself from the tent, all I could see was the barest glimpse of his tail disappearing into the darkness of the forest. "Rusty!" I bellowed, panic rising like bile in my throat. My headlamp barely penetrated the wall of darkness before me. I could hear him barking, the sound already disturbingly distant, moving rapidly downhill toward the river. I grabbed my knife and the bear spray and plunged after him, abandoning all caution in my desperation. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I kept moving, following the increasingly faint sound of Rusty's barks. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees growing impossibly dense, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. My headlamp beam grew dimmer, though I'd replaced the batteries just before the trip. I lost all sense of direction, aware only that I was moving downhill, toward water. I could hear it now, not the pleasant burble of the river from earlier, but a deeper, more ominous sound, the roar of a waterfall or rapids. Rusty's barking had stopped. The silence that replaced it was deafening. "Rusty!" I called again, my voice breaking. "Come back, boy." Nothing. I stumbled onward, the ground growing increasingly steep and treacherous. Then, without warning, the trees opened up and I found myself standing at the edge of a deep gorge. Far below, barely visible in the weak beam of my headlamp, dark water churned through a narrow channel, throwing up ghostly spray that caught what little light there was. This had to be the Jacks River Falls, a 60-foot cascade that plunged into a deep, rocky pool. It wasn't supposed to be anywhere near our campsite according to my map. I had somehow gotten completely turned around in my panicked flight through the forest. Movement caught my eye, something pale moving near the base of the falls. I adjusted my headlamp, trying to get a better look. It was Rusty, pacing anxiously at the edge of the churning pool. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern. The rocks down there were slick and treacherous, and if he fell into those rapids... "Rusty, stay!" I shouted, though I doubted he could hear me over the roar of the falls. I needed to get down there. Looking around, I spotted what appeared to be a rough path leading down the side of the gorge, little more than a game trail, but better than trying to climb down the nearly vertical slope. The descent was harrowing. The path, such as it was, switchbacked down the gorge wall in places so steep that I had to turn and descend backward, feeling for footholds in the dark. My headlamp continued to dim, the beam now barely stronger than a candle flame. By the time I neared the bottom, I was soaked with sweat despite the cool air rising from the water. The roar of the falls was disorienting, making it impossible to tell which direction sounds were coming from. "Rusty!" I called again, scanning the shoreline. The mist from the falls created ghostly shapes that seemed to move with purpose until my light fell directly on them, revealing nothing but swirling vapor. I reached the bottom and picked my way carefully along the shore, trying to reach the spot where I'd seen Rusty. The rocks were indeed treacherous, slick with spray and organic matter, forcing me to test each step before committing my weight. I rounded a large boulder and froze. There, in a small, relatively flat area at the very edge of the pool, stood Rusty. But he wasn't alone. A figure crouched beside him, one pale hand resting on his back. In the failing light of my headlamp, I could make out only impressions. A slender form, long dark hair hanging in wet ropes, clothing that might once have been a dress but now hung in tattered, sodden strips. As if sensing my presence, the figure looked up. The face that turned toward me was mostly hidden by the curtain of hair, but I caught a glimpse of eyes reflecting the light like a nocturnal animal's, unnaturally bright and fixed directly on me. Rusty made no move to come to me. He stood unnaturally still under the figure's touching hand. "Let him go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please." The figure tilted its head, an eerily bird-like motion. When it spoke, the voice was the same as the one outside my tent, but clearer now, with an accent I couldn't place, old-fashioned with hard consonants and elongated vowels. "He came willingly," it said. "They always do. Animals know what lies beneath." "What do you want?" I asked, taking a careful step closer. The knife in my hand felt useless, but I gripped it tighter anyway. "Company," the figure said simply. "It's lonely down here. Cold. Dark." It stroked Rusty's head almost tenderly. "Eliza waits so long between visitors." Eliza, the name carved in the tree. "You're Eliza?" I asked, playing for time as I inched closer. The figure nodded, hair swaying with the motion. "Once. Now I'm the river and the river is me." "What happened to you?" I don't know why I asked. Some desperate attempt to engage this creature in conversation while I tried to figure out how to get Rusty away from it. "I walked these woods in 1928, the figure said dreamily, "with my love, Thomas. We came to see the falls. He said it was the most beautiful place in Georgia." A sound emerged then, something between a laugh and a sob. "He didn't tell me how dangerous the rocks were, how slippery, how cold the water would be." A chill that had nothing to do with the mist ran through me. I was less than 10 feet away now, close enough to see more details of the figure, the unnatural paleness of the exposed skin, the way the fingers that stroked Rusty's fur were too long, too thin, ending in what looked more like claws than nails. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said, meaning it despite my fear, "but please, let my dog go. He's all I have." The figure, Eliza, went very still. "All you have?" she repeated, voice hardening. You have a life. Breath in your lungs, warmth in your blood. The hand on Rusty's back tensed visibly. I have only the cold and the dark, and occasionally company. Rusty whimpered then, the first sound he'd made since I'd found him. The noise jolted me from my paralysis. Without thinking further, I lunged forward, slashing with the knife at the arm that held my dog. The blade connected with something solid but wrong. Not the resistance of flesh, but something colder, firmer, like cutting into half-frozen mud. The figure shrieked, the same inhuman sound I'd heard at the campsite, and recoiled. "Rusty, come!" I shouted, backing away quickly. For a terrible moment, he didn't move. Then, as if awakening from a trance, he shook himself and bounded toward me. Relief flooded through me as his familiar weight pressed against my leg. But my relief was short-lived. The figure rose to its full height, much taller than I'd initially thought, well over 6 feet. The movement seemed wrong, joints bending in impossible ways as it unfolded itself. Through the curtain of hair, I now saw its face clearly in the dying light of my headlamp. It might once have been human, but decades in the cold river had erased most of that humanity. The skin was bloodless white, stretched tight over 2 sharp cheekbones. The eyes were huge, black pools with no visible whites or iris. The mouth, when it opened, revealed rows of narrow, pointed teeth like those of some deep-water fish. "You would deny me company?" it said, voice dropping to a guttural growl. "After I've been so patient? So gentle?" It took a step toward us, moving with an unsettling fluidity. Water streamed constantly from its body and hair, but impossibly, it never seemed to diminish or dry. "I've waited 96 years, it continued, advancing steadily. Watching, calling. Most pass by, unseeing, unhearing. But you," it pointed a long, clawed finger at me. "You heard me. You came to my waters." I backed away, knife held before me in a trembling hand. Rusty growled beside me, hackles raised. "We're leaving," I said with far more confidence than I felt. "Go back to your river." The thing that had once been Eliza laughed, a sound like water rushing over rocks. "The river is everywhere here," it said, "and I've marked you both." With shocking speed, it lunged forward, covering the distance between us in a single bound. I slashed wildly with the knife, feeling it connect but doing no apparent damage. Cold, strong hands gripped my shoulders, claws puncturing fabric and skin. The stench of rot and river mud filled my nostrils as its face drew close to mine. "Join me," it whispered, its breath like the cold, damp air from a deep cave. "The water isn't so bad once you stop fighting it." It began dragging me backward, toward the churning pool. My boots slid helplessly on the slick rocks. The knife fell from my grasp as I grabbed desperately at anything to stop our progress, but found only smooth, wet stone. Rusty attacked then, launching himself at the creature with a ferocity I'd never witnessed before. His teeth sank into its arm with an audible crunch. The creature howled and released me, trying to shake off the dog. I scrambled for purchase on the slippery ground, searching frantically for my fallen knife. My hands found instead a jagged piece of driftwood, worn smooth by the river but still hefty and solid. The creature had managed to dislodge Rusty, flinging him against a boulder with terrible force. He yelped in pain but immediately struggled to his feet, clearly injured but still determined to fight. "No!" I screamed, and charged forward with the makeshift club. I swung with all my strength, connecting solidly with the creature's head. There was a sickening, wet crunch, and the thing that had been Eliza staggered sideways. Dark fluid that might have been blood oozed from a depression in its skull. It turned to me, mouth open in a silent scream of rage. I swung again, connecting with less force but enough to drive it back another step. I pressed my advantage, swinging repeatedly, driving the creature steadily back toward the churning pool. It retreated before my assault but showed no further signs of injury despite the repeated blows. "Get back to your river," I shouted, punctuating each word with another swing. "Leave us alone." With a final, desperate effort, I charged forward, ramming the jagged end of the driftwood directly into the center of its chest. The creature stiffened, black eyes widening in what looked almost like surprise. For an instant, we stood frozen in tableau, me, arms extended, driving the improvised weapon forward. The creature, impaled and unmoving, dark fluid pulsing around the wood. Then it spoke, in a voice suddenly young and frightened and human. "I just wanted company," it said softly. "It's so cold down there alone." Before I could respond, it stepped backward deliberately, directly into the churning pool. The current caught it immediately, pulling it under and away. In seconds, it had vanished beneath the dark water, leaving only the faintest disturbance on the surface to mark its passing. I stood trembling, adrenaline still coursing through my system. Rusty limped to my side, whining softly. I knelt beside him, checking for injuries. His right hind leg seemed to be the worst. Not broken, I thought, but badly bruised. He licked my face anxiously. "It's okay, boy," I murmured. "It's over. We're okay." But even as I said the words, I knew nothing was okay. We were injured at the bottom of a steep gorge in the middle of the night, with no clear path back to our campsite. My headlamp was failing, providing only the weakest illumination, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't truly gone, just returned to its domain. The water continued to churn and foam in the pool, the roar of the falls drowning out all other sounds. I imagined that pale form moving beneath the surface, watching, waiting for another opportunity. Perhaps it couldn't leave the water again tonight after being injured, but by tomorrow. "We have to get out of here," I said to Rusty. "Can you walk, buddy?" He took a few tentative steps, limping heavily but mobile. It would have to do. I couldn't carry him up that treacherous path, and I certainly wasn't leaving him behind. The ascent was grueling. Every step was a battle against gravity and fear, my hands bloodied from clutching at rocks and roots to pull myself upward. Rusty struggled behind me, occasionally whimpering but never quitting. By the time we reached the top, the first faint light of dawn was filtering through the trees. My headlamp had died completely halfway up, forcing me to navigate the final stretch by feel and the meager pre-dawn light. I had no idea where we were in relation to our campsite, but I knew we needed to head uphill, away from the river. Using the rising sun as a guide, I oriented myself eastward and began walking, Rusty limping faithfully at my side. We walked for nearly 2 hours before, by some miracle, we stumbled upon the trail. Another hour brought us back to Bear Creek Gap and our abandoned campsite. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Tent open, sleeping bag half pulled through the door in my haste to follow Rusty. Even my pack leaned undisturbed against a tree. I quickly broke camp, stuffing gear haphazardly into my backpack. We needed to get out of these woods back to civilization as quickly as possible. The return journey was a blur of pain, exhaustion, and hypervigilance. Every rustle in the underbrush, every splash from the river sent spikes of panic through me. Rusty stayed glued to my side, his limp gradually improving but never fully disappearing. We made a forced march, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest or filter water. By late afternoon, we emerged from the Cohuta wilderness at the same trailhead where our journey had begun. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other vehicles besides my dusty Subaru. I loaded Rusty carefully into the back seat, noting with concern that his limp had worsened during the final miles. The drive to Ellijay, the nearest town of any size, took nearly an hour on winding mountain roads. I found a veterinary clinic that was still open and carried Rusty inside, ignoring my own exhaustion and injuries. The vet, a kind-faced woman in her 50s named Dr. Mitchell, examined Rusty thoroughly while I waited anxiously in the small exam room. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything substantial in nearly 24 hours. "He's got some significant bruising and a mild sprain, but no breaks or internal injuries that I can detect," Dr. Mitchell said finally, running a gentle hand over Rusty's flank. "What happened out there?" I hesitated. How could I possibly explain what we'd encountered in the wilderness? "We had an accident at Jack's River Falls," I said finally. "Rusty fell on some rocks." Dr. Mitchell gave me a long look, taking in my disheveled appearance, the scratches on my face and arms, the haunted look that I knew must be in my eyes. "The falls are dangerous," she said after a moment. "People underestimate them." "Yes," I agreed, relieved that she wasn't pressing for details. "We were lucky." She prescribed anti-inflammatories and rest for Rusty, and suggested that I might want to visit the urgent care center across town for my own injuries. I thanked her, paid the bill, and carried Rusty back to the car. Instead of seeking medical attention, though, I drove straight to the nearest motel, a slightly run-down place called the Mountain View Lodge at the edge of town. I needed a shower, food, and sleep in that order before I could face any more human interaction. The motel clerk barely glanced at my battered appearance as I checked in, for which I was grateful. Once in the room, I turned the shower as hot as I could stand it and stood under the spray until the water began to cool, watching dirt, blood, and river grime swirl down the drain. Clean and dressed in the only spare clothes I had, jeans and a t-shirt I'd kept in the car, I ordered pizza delivery and sat on the bed beside Rusty, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. As I waited for the food to arrive, I pulled out my phone and began researching. Eliza Cohuta Wilderness, 1928, yielded several results almost immediately. The top link was to an article from the local historical society. The tragedy at Jack's River Falls. Remembering Eliza Burnett. With trembling fingers, I tapped the link. The article loaded, revealing a black-and-white photograph of a young woman in 1920s clothing, a light-colored dress with a dropped waist, hair bobbed in the fashion of the era. She stood beside a tall young man in front of what appeared to be a general store, both smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Eliza Burnett and Thomas Hayes, photographed in Blue Ridge, GA, 1 week before her disappearance, May 1928. I stared at the image, unable to reconcile this smiling, vital young woman with the horrific entity we'd encountered in the gorge. Her face was pretty in an unremarkable way. Round cheeks, clear eyes, a slightly crooked smile. Nothing about her suggested the horror she would become. The article told a tragic but straightforward story. Eliza Burnett, 22, and her fiancé, Thomas Hayes, 25, had gone hiking to Jack's River Falls in late May 1928. Thomas returned alone, distraught, reporting that Eliza had slipped on the rocks at the base of the falls and been swept away by the current. Her body was never recovered despite extensive searches. Thomas was initially suspected of foul play. Local gossip suggested the couple had been arguing about postponing their wedding, but was eventually cleared when other hikers came forward reporting the dangerous conditions at the falls that day after heavy rains. The article noted that Thomas never recovered from the trauma, becoming a recluse in the small cabin he had been building for himself and Eliza. He died by suicide in 1932, leaving a note that simply said, "She calls to me from the river. I am going to her." Local legend, the article continued, held that Eliza's spirit remained at the falls, calling to unwary hikers. Several drownings over the decades had been attributed to her influence, always young men traveling alone or with dogs. Dogs. The detail jumped out at me. I looked at Rusty, still sleeping peacefully. Why would the presence specifically target people with dogs? Another search. Eliza Burnett dog. Fewer results this time, but one caught my eye, a scanned newspaper clipping from 1928, missing woman's dog found. The brief article reported that Eliza's Cocker Spaniel, which had accompanied the couple on their hike, had been found wandering near the trailhead 2 days after she disappeared, soaked and injured but alive. Was that it? Was the entity drawn to dogs because they reminded it of what it had lost? Or was there something deeper, some connection between animals and the supernatural that allowed the creature to use them somehow? A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. The pizza had arrived. I paid the delivery person and returned to the bed, suddenly ravenous. As I ate, I continued reading, falling down a rabbit hole of local legends and reported incidents in the Cohuta wilderness. The pizza was half gone when I came across a more recent article, dated just 3 years ago. Hiker missing in Cohuta wilderness, dog found injured. The details were eerily familiar. A solo hiker, David Lacey, 29, had gone missing while backpacking the Jacks River Trail. His German Shepherd had been found limping along a forest road miles from their intended route, tags identifying the owner. Extensive searches had found no trace of Lacey. My appetite vanished. I set the pizza box aside and leaned back against the headboard, mind racing. How many others had encountered what we had? How many hadn't been as lucky as we were? And, most troubling, were we truly free of it? The entity had said it had marked us. What did that mean? I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke with a start to early morning light filtering through the thin motel curtains. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then, the events of the past 2 days came rushing back, and I sat up with a gasp. Rusty was no longer on the bed beside me. Panic shot through me like lightning. "Rusty!" I called, voice breaking. A soft whine answered me from the direction of the bathroom. Relief flooded through me as I saw him standing in the doorway, watching me with concerned eyes. His limp was still evident as he padded over to the bed, but he seemed stronger this morning. I checked out of the motel after a quick breakfast from the vending machine. I considered heading straight home to Atlanta, but something pulled me in another direction. I needed to understand what had happened to us. Needed some kind of closure or explanation. The Blue Ridge Historical Society was housed in a quaint Victorian building near the center of town. It wasn't yet open when I arrived, so I walked Rusty carefully around the small park across the street, his limp less pronounced after a night's rest. When the society opened at 10, I tied Rusty to a bench outside with a bowl of water and stepped into the cool interior of the building. A silver-haired woman looked up from a desk covered in papers and smiled. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "I hope so," I said. "I'm researching an incident that happened at Jacks River Falls in 1928. A woman named Eliza Burnett." The woman's smile faded slightly. "Ah, yes, our local tragedy. Are you a journalist?" "No, just interested in local history. I was hiking in the area recently." She nodded, though I sensed a certain reservation in her manner. "Well, we have a file on the Burnett case. It's one of our more requested items, especially around Halloween." Her smile returned, thin but polite. Ghost hunters and the like, you know. She disappeared into a back room and returned moments later with a manila folder. "You're welcome to look through this in our reading room. Just please handle everything carefully. Some of these documents are quite fragile." The reading room was small but well lit, with a large oak table in the center. I sat and carefully opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopies of official reports, and several black and white photographs, all meticulously preserved in acid-free sleeves. Much of it covered the same ground as the articles I'd read online, but there were additional details here. Statements from Thomas Hayes about their final moments together, reports from the search parties, even a few pages that appeared to be from Eliza's diary, donated by her family decades after her death. One photograph in particular caught my attention. It showed Thomas and Eliza at what appeared to be a picnic, seated on a blanket. Between them sat a small cocker spaniel, its coat light-colored, perhaps the golden red described in the newspaper article. Both humans were looking at the dog with evident affection. The caption on the back, in faded pencil, read, "Tom, Eliza, and Rusty at Lake Blue Ridge, Spring 1928. Rusty. The dog's name had been Rusty. A chill ran through me. I stared at the photo, unable to look away. It couldn't be a coincidence. My dog, also named Rusty, also with a reddish coat, had been the entity's focus from the beginning. It had recognized something in him, some echo of what it had lost nearly a century ago. I flipped quickly through the other documents, looking for more information about the dog. There wasn't much, just the brief mention of it being found after Eliza's disappearance, and a note that it had gone to live with Eliza's parents but had never been the same after the incident. The final item in the folder was a photocopy of Thomas Hayes's suicide note, the full version rather than the single line quoted in the article. It was brief but chilling. "She calls to me from the river. I am going to her. She is not the same anymore. There is something else in her now, something old and cold that was in the water before her. But sometimes I see my Eliza looking out through those eyes, trapped and frightened. She needs me, and she has Rusty now too. They both call to me in the night. I cannot resist any longer." I closed the folder carefully, mind reeling. Whatever had taken Eliza had somehow maintained a connection to the things she had loved, her fiancé and her dog. And now, almost a century later, it had tried to use my Rusty to lure me to the same fate. I returned the folder to the silver-haired woman, thanking her with what I hoped was a normal expression. She gave me an appraising look. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked. "I think so," I replied. "It's a sad story." "Yes," she agreed, "but that's not usually what brings people to ask about Eliza." I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "Have there been other incidents at the falls?" Her gaze sharpened. "You could say that. There have been drownings, disappearances, more than should be attributable to normal wilderness dangers." She leaned slightly forward. "Did something happen while you were hiking?" For a moment, I considered telling her everything: the entity by the river, the voice that knew my name, the desperate fight at the base of the falls. But even as the words formed in my mind, I knew how they would sound. Crazy, delusional. "No," I said finally. "Just curious." She didn't believe me, I could see it in her eyes, but she nodded politely. "Well, if you're planning to go back into the Cohuta wilderness, I'd stick to the ridgelines. Stay away from the river, especially the falls." She picked up a pen and toyed with it absently. "We lost another hiker there just a few years back, young man with a German shepherd." "I read about that," I said. "Did they ever find him?" "No." Her voice had gone flat. "Just the dog. Poor thing was traumatized. Wouldn't go near water afterward. Wouldn't even drink from a bowl unless it could see the bottom. I thought of my Rusty outside, waited to be sure my voice would be steady. What happened to the dog?" "The man's sister adopted it, I believe. She brought it to some of the search efforts, thinking it might lead them to her brother." She shook her head. "It never did. Just sat at the trailhead and howled whenever they tried to take it back into the woods." I thanked her again and left, stepping gratefully into the bright morning sunlight. Rusty greeted me with a wagging tail, seemingly fully recovered from his ordeal. I untied his leash and knelt beside him, examining him carefully in the clear light. That's when I noticed it. A thin strand of dark hair tangled in his collar, too long to be his own, too coarse to be human. With trembling fingers, I pulled it free and held it up to the light. It moved in my grasp, twisting slightly as if alive, though there was no breeze to explain the motion. As I watched, horrified, it seemed to dissolve, becoming first translucent, then liquefying completely, running down my fingers in a thin trickle that evaporated before it could drip to the ground. I wiped my hand frantically on my jeans, a deep, primal disgust overwhelming me. Rusty whined, pressing against my legs. "It's okay," I whispered, though I knew it wasn't. "We're going home now, far away from here." We drove straight through to Atlanta that day, stopping only for gas and drive-through food. I kept the windows up despite the heat, irrationally afraid that the entity might somehow have followed us, might be in the rushing air along the highway, in the roadside streams we crossed. My apartment in Midtown felt alien after the ordeal, too normal, too disconnected from the horror we'd experienced. I moved through the rooms mechanically, unpacking, showering again though I was already clean, checking the doors and windows repeatedly. That night, I lay awake in bed, Rusty curled protectively at my feet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face looking up at me from the churning pool, heard that voice calling my name in the darkness outside my tent. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no relief. I dreamed of dark water closing over my head, of pale hands pulling me deeper, of Rusty swimming desperately above me, just out of reach. I woke, gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Days passed, then weeks. Outwardly, life returned to normal. I went back to work at the architectural firm, took Rusty for walks in Piedmont Park, met friends for dinner, but I wasn't the same. I avoided bodies of water, crossing to the other side of the street to avoid decorative fountains. I took showers only, no baths, and kept them as brief as possible. Rusty changed too. He had always loved water, chasing sprinklers, splashing in puddles, trying to catch the spray from the garden hose. Now he growled at running water, would only drink from a shallow dish, and trembled violently during rainstorms. I researched other incidents in the Cohuta wilderness obsessively, creating a timeline of disappearances and drownings stretching back decades. Too many followed the same pattern: solo hikers or small groups, often with dogs, vanishing near bodies of water. Sometimes bodies were recovered, sometimes not. But the dogs, if present, almost always survived, though they were invariably described as changed or traumatized. 3 months after our escape, I woke in the middle of the night to find Rusty standing at the bedroom door, growling softly. The hair on his back was raised, his body rigid with tension. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, instantly alert. He didn't respond, just continued staring at the closed door as if seeing something beyond it. I slipped out of bed and moved to his side, placing a reassuring hand on his back. He felt unusually cold to the touch, his fur slightly damp though the room was dry. With a growing sense of dread, I reached for the doorknob. Some instinct told me not to open it, that something waited on the other side that I did not want to confront. But I had to know. The apartment beyond was dark and still. Nothing moved in the shadows of the living room. No sounds disturbed the pre-dawn silence. Everything was exactly as I'd left it before going to bed. The remote control on the coffee table, yesterday's coffee mug beside the sink, Rusty's toys in their basket by the couch. Except for one thing: a small puddle of water on the hardwood floor directly in front of the bathroom door. Heart pounding, I approached it slowly. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but it shouldn't have been there at all. I crouched beside it, not touching it, just looking. In the dim light filtering through the blinds from the street outside, I could see that it wasn't perfectly clear. There was a faint murkiness to it, organic, like river water. As I watched, the puddle moved, not spreading or flowing as water should, but contracting, drawing in on itself as if pulled by some unseen force. It shrank gradually until it was no larger than a coin, then disappeared completely, leaving not even a damp spot on the floor to mark where it had been. I backed away until I hit the wall, then slid down to sit on the floor, knees drawn up to my chest. Rusty came to me, pressing his warm body against my side, whimpering softly. "She marked us," I whispered, remembering the entity's words. "She can find us." The next day, I began making arrangements. I couldn't stay in Atlanta, couldn't stay anywhere near Georgia or its rivers. I needed distance, dryness, elevation. The American Southwest called to me, Arizona or New Mexico, with their desert landscapes and minimal surface water. Within a month, I had resigned from my job, sold most of my possessions, and packed what remained into my Subaru. Rusty and I headed west, driving straight through, stopping only when necessary. I felt a palpable relief as we crossed the Mississippi, putting that massive watershed behind us. We ended up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 7,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by high desert and mountains. I found work with a small architectural firm specializing in sustainable desert buildings and rented a simple adobe house on the outskirts of town with a walled courtyard where Rusty could safely spend time outdoors. Gradually, the nightmares receded. Rusty stopped growling at running water, though he never regained his former enthusiasm for it. We hiked the high, dry trails of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, always careful to avoid the few streams that cut through the rocky landscape. But I never fully relaxed. On rare, rainy nights, I would sometimes wake to find Rusty standing alert, staring at the front door or a window, a low growl rumbling in his chest. On those nights, I would leave every light in the house burning until dawn. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep claimed me, I would hear it, a voice at the very edge of perception, calling my name with an accent from another time. Marcus. Just that. Not threatening, not immediately dangerous. Just a reminder. She knows where I am. She's patient. She can wait. And sometimes, like now, as I write this account of what happened to us in the Cojuta wilderness, I catch movement from the corner of my eye. A shadow passing across the wall that doesn't match any object in the room. A ripple in the water glass on my bedside table when nothing has disturbed it. I've learned to live with these reminders. They're the price of our escape, the echo of Cojuta that will follow us for the rest of our lives. But I keep a bag packed, ready in the closet, and I study maps of even drier, higher places, plotting possible routes that cross the fewest bodies of water, because I know that someday the voice might get closer. The puddles might grow larger, and on that day, Rusty and I will need to run again. Until then, I leave this account as a warning to others. If you hike in the Cojuta wilderness, stay away from Jack's River Falls. Don't camp near the water, and if you bring a dog, keep it close. Eliza is waiting, and she's lonely down there in the dark, cold water. My name is Marcus Bianchi, and I am 34 years old. This happened in August 2024. The hiking trail ahead of me vanished into the dense fog that had settled over Blood Mountain. Georgia in summer should have been sweltering, but here in the northern reaches of the Chattahoochee National Forest, the temperature had plummeted overnight. My breath came out in visible puffs as I checked my GPS again. The blue dot representing my location jumped erratically across the screen before freezing completely. "Hey Marcus, you coming or what?" I looked up to see Eli's lanky silhouette several yards ahead, already disappearing into the mist. Behind him, Patrick's stockier frame was hunched under his oversized backpack. The three of us had been planning this trip for months, a week-long hike through the most remote sections of the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. A chance to disconnect from our soul-crushing corporate jobs and reconnect with each other. "GPS is acting up again," I called, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. "Damn technology," Patrick laughed. "That's why I brought this." He proudly held up an old-fashioned paper map. Old reliable. What I didn't tell them was how the GPS hadn't just frozen. For a moment, it had shown us in completely different locations, spread miles apart across the wilderness. A glitch, obviously, but still, something about it made my skin crawl. Eli had always been our unofficial leader since college days, impulsive, charismatic, and with an unshakable confidence that bordered on recklessness. Patrick was the cautious one, meticulously planning every detail of our trip but quick to panic when things went sideways. And me? I was somewhere in between, the mediator who kept the peace when Eli's impulsiveness clashed with Patrick's anxiety. "We should reach Walker Gap Shelter before nightfall," Patrick said, studying his map. "About 4 more miles." "Perfect," Eli grinned. "I've got a flask of bourbon with our names on it." The path narrowed as we continued our ascent, the fog thickening until visibility dropped to mere feet. The forest around us fell silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of insects. Just the crunch of our boots on the trail and our increasingly labored breathing. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" Patrick whispered, his voice surprisingly loud in the stillness. "It's the fog," Eli replied, but even his perpetual confidence seemed dimmed. Sound doesn't travel the same way. I wasn't convinced. I'd hiked in fog before, and while it muffled distant sounds, it didn't create this absolute vacuum of noise. It felt as if we had stepped into a pocket of the world where sound itself was unwelcome. "Let's keep moving," I suggested, suddenly eager to reach the shelter. "Daylight won't last forever." The trail curved sharply upward, and I felt the familiar burn in my thighs. Despite the chill, sweat beaded on my forehead. As we climbed higher, the fog began to thin, allowing glimpses of the valley below. The view should have been spectacular, rolling mountains stretching to the horizon, a tapestry of green beneath the summer sky. Instead, I saw only more fog, a sea of grayish-white that seemed to have swallowed the world whole. "Check this out," Eli called from ahead. He had stopped at a small clearing just off the trail. In the center stood a crude arrangement of stones, a rough circle with smaller stones arranged in patterns inside it. "Probably just some kids messing around," Patrick said, but he didn't sound convinced. I approached the stone circle slowly. Something about its precision, despite its roughness, suggested purpose rather than random play. At the center lay a small pile of bones, too small to be human, thankfully. Rodent bones, perhaps. Or from small birds. "We should go," I said, the words coming out before I'd even formed the thought. "Now." Eli raised an eyebrow. "What's got you spooked, Marcus? It's just rocks." But he didn't argue when I started walking again, faster this time. The others followed, and none of us mentioned the stone circle again as we continued our climb. The fog returned, thicker than before as we neared Walker Gap. According to Patrick's map, the shelter should have been visible by now, but there was no sign of the wooden structure. The trail itself seemed to be disappearing, growing fainter with each step until we were essentially navigating by instinct through the dense underbrush. "This can't be right," Patrick muttered, studying his map with increasing frustration. "We should be there already." "Let me see." Eli took the map, turning it this way and that. "Maybe we missed a turn." "Impossible," Patrick insisted. "I've been watching every marker." I pulled out my phone again. The GPS was working now, but what it showed made no sense. According to the blue dot, we were nowhere near the Appalachian Trail. In fact, we were miles west of where we should have been, in an area of the forest with no marked trails at all. "Guys," I said slowly, showing them the screen. "Something's wrong." Eli laughed, but it sounded forced. "Your phone's busted, that's all. We've been following the trail the whole time." "Have we?" I gestured to our surroundings. The fog had momentarily thinned, revealing dense forest in every direction. No trail, no markers, just wilderness. For the first time, worry creased Eli's features. "That's impossible. We haven't left the trail." "Well, we're off it now," Patrick said, his voice rising with panic. "We need to backtrack before it gets dark." But which way was back? I turned in a slow circle, trying to identify the direction we had come from. Every angle looked identical. The same trees, the same undergrowth, the same oppressive fog creeping back in. "The sun," Eli said suddenly. "We've been heading northeast all day. If we go southwest, we should hit the trail again." It was a good plan, except for one problem. The fog had obliterated any sign of the sun, making it impossible to determine direction. Our phone's compasses were spinning wildly, as unreliable as the GPS. "We need to stay calm," I said, as much for my own benefit as theirs. "Let's pick a direction and stick to it. We're bound to hit something eventually. A trail, a road, something." Patrick nodded stiffly while Eli put on a brave face. "Lead the way, then." I chose what I hoped was southwest and started walking. The others followed close behind, nobody wanting to be left alone in the increasingly ominous forest. The temperature continued to drop as daylight faded. Soon we would need our headlamps. "We should set up camp," Patrick suggested after an hour of fruitless wandering. "It's getting dark, and we're not finding the trail." Eli started to protest but then sighed in defeat. "Yeah, you're right. We'll have better luck in the morning." We found a small clearing and began the familiar routine of setting up camp. The physical labor helped calm my nerves, giving me something concrete to focus on. Soon, we had 3 tents arranged in a rough triangle around what would be our campfire, except the fire wouldn't light. "What the hell?" Eli muttered, striking his lighter for the dozenth time. The flame would catch the kindling, flare briefly, then die as if suffocated. "This wood is dry enough." I tried with my own lighter, then matches, with the same result. Each time, the flame would sputter and die unnaturally quickly. "It's too damp," Patrick suggested, but we all knew that wasn't it. The wood was bone dry. We eventually gave up on the fire and settled for a cold dinner of trail mix and beef jerky. Night had fallen completely now, our headlamps creating small islands of light in the overwhelming darkness. We spoke little, each lost in our own thoughts about our predicament. "Listen," Patrick said suddenly, his voice tight with fear. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp, whistling. A simple, melodic tune that somehow managed to be deeply unsettling. "Hello?" Eli called out. "Someone there?" The whistling stopped immediately. Silence rushed back in, somehow louder than before. "Probably just the wind," I said, not believing it for a second. "There is no wind," Patrick whispered. He was right. The air was completely still. "I'm turning in," Eli announced a bit too loudly. "We need rest if we're going to find our way back tomorrow." None of us wanted to be alone, but the alternative, sitting in the dark, jumping at every sound, seemed worse. We retreated to our respective tents with tense goodnights. Inside my tent, I lay fully clothed in my sleeping bag, staring up at the nylon ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every rustle outside sent my heart racing. Was it an animal? The wind that had finally decided to make an appearance? Or something else? I must have dozed off eventually because I jerked awake to the sound of Patrick screaming. I fumbled for my headlamp and burst out of my tent, nearly colliding with Eli, who had emerged at the same moment. Patrick was standing in front of his open tent, his face ghostly pale in the beam of our lights. "Someone was in my tent," he gasped. "I woke up and someone was sitting at the foot of my sleeping bag." "What?" Eli swept his light around the campsite. "There's nobody here." "I'm telling you, someone was there," Patrick's voice cracked. I felt the weight on my legs. I opened my eyes and saw a shape, a person. I checked Patrick's tent myself, but found nothing disturbed. "Maybe it was a dream," I suggested gently. Patrick shook his head violently. "It wasn't a dream. It was watching me. And when I screamed, it smiled." None of us slept after that. We sat in a tight circle, backs together, headlamps illuminating the darkness around us. Occasionally, we would hear sounds from the forest, cracking branches, rustling leaves, and once that same whistling tune, closer now. "We're leaving at first light," Eli said, his earlier bravado gone. "Forget the trail. We head downhill until we hit a road." Patrick and I nodded in agreement. The remaining hours until dawn stretched endlessly, each minute dragging into the next. We spoke little, straining our ears for any sound of approach. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the trees, it brought little relief. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, reducing visibility to mere yards. We packed up quickly, nobody wanting to linger. "My backpack," Patrick said suddenly, his voice hollow. "Something's wrong with it." He turned it upside down, emptying the contents onto the ground. Everything was covered in a thick black mold: clothes, food, equipment. Items that had been perfectly fine the night before were now rotting, as if they had been left exposed to the elements for months. Eli checked his pack next and found the same decay. So did I, only our water remained uncontaminated, sealed in metal bottles. "This isn't possible," Patrick whispered. "This isn't fucking possible." But the evidence was right in front of us. Our supplies ruined overnight. "We've got water," Eli said, attempting to sound confident. and we can still get out of here today. Let's move." We salvaged what we could and set off, following the downward slope of the land. According to basic wilderness survival, heading downhill would eventually lead to water, and water would lead to civilization. It had to. The fog swirled around us as we descended, sometimes thinning enough to see a few dozen yards ahead, sometimes thickening until we could barely see each other. The forest changed subtly as we walked, the trees growing taller, older, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes. Moss hung in long strands, brushing against our faces like skeletal fingers. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Patrick asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I had been fighting that exact sensation since we'd left camp, the prickling awareness of eyes tracking our movements. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing there, yet the feeling persisted. "It's just the fog playing tricks," Eli said, but his pace quickened. Around midday, though it was hard to tell through the dense canopy and fog, we stumbled upon a small, decrepit cabin nestled between two massive oak trees. Its windows were broken, the door hanging precariously from a single hinge. "Hello?" Eli called out. "Anyone home?" Silence answered him. We should check it out, he decided. Might find something useful, or a map. Patrick shook his head. "I don't like it. Something doesn't feel right." I had to agree with Patrick. Everything about the cabin seemed wrong. Its placement in this pathless section of forest, its state of decay suggesting decades of abandonment. Yet the cleared area around it was relatively free of undergrowth. "You two wait here then," Eli said. "I'll be quick." Before we could stop him, he approached the cabin, stepped cautiously through the doorway, and disappeared inside. Patrick and I waited in tense silence. 1 minute passed, then 5. "Eli," I called out. No response. "I'm going after him," I decided, ignoring Patrick's protests. The interior of the cabin was a single room, dark and musty. What little furniture remained was broken, scattered across the warped wooden floor. In the center of the room stood Eli, completely motionless, staring at the far wall. "Eli, you okay, man?" He didn't respond or acknowledge me in any way. I moved closer, reaching for his shoulder. "Eli?" When my hand touched him, he turned slowly. His face was blank, expressionless, but his eyes were wrong. The pupils had expanded to swallow the iris entirely, 2 black pools that reflected nothing. "We should stay here," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "She wants us to stay." "Who wants us to stay?" I asked, fighting the urge to back away from him. "Eli, what's going on?" His head tilted at an unnatural angle. "The old woman, the one who owns this place. She's been watching us since we arrived in her forest." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "There's no one here, Eli. Let's go back to Patrick and get moving." Eli's face contorted into a smile that was too wide, stretching his lips in a way that must have been painful. "She's here now." Against my better judgment, I turned to look where Eli was pointing. The wall behind me was covered in crude symbols carved directly into the wood. Spirals, stick figures, and other shapes I couldn't identify. They seemed to move in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly at any one symbol, it remained static. "We need to leave," I said firmly, grabbing Eli's arm. "Now." His skin was ice-cold beneath my fingers, but he didn't resist as I pulled him toward the door. Outside, Patrick was pacing anxiously. "Finally!" he exclaimed. "What took so long?" Before I could answer, Eli spoke in that same flat voice. "We should stay here. It will be dark soon." Patrick looked at me questioningly. I shook my head slightly, not wanting to explain in front of Eli. Something was very wrong with our friend, but I had no idea what or how to help him. "Let's keep moving," I said instead. "We still have several hours of daylight left." Eli didn't argue, but as we walked away from the cabin, I caught him looking back repeatedly, the unnatural smile still fixed on his face. We continued our descent through the forest. the land growing steeper. Eli walked slightly ahead of us now, moving with a strange gliding gait that didn't match his usual energetic stride. Occasionally, he would stop and tilt his head as if listening to something only he could hear, then nod slightly before continuing. "What happened in there?" Patrick whispered to me when Eli was far enough ahead not to hear. "I don't know," I admitted. "He was just standing there staring at the wall, and his eyes—" I shuddered at the memory. Something's not right with him. "We need to watch him," Patrick said, "and each other. Don't go anywhere alone." I nodded in agreement, grateful that Patrick seemed to be overcoming his earlier panic to think clearly about our situation. The fog began to lift as the afternoon wore on, but instead of being reassuring, the increased visibility only revealed how truly lost we were. The forest around us looked nothing like the Chattahoochee I knew. The trees were too old, too gnarled, the undergrowth too dense and twisted. It was as if we had somehow wandered into a different forest entirely, one that had never known human presence. We came to a small stream, its water running clear over moss-covered stones. According to all logic, following it downstream would lead us to larger bodies of water and eventually civilization. But as I stared at the gently flowing water, a profound sense of wrongness washed over me. This stream felt artificial somehow, like a prop in a movie set rather than a natural waterway. "Should we follow it?" Patrick asked, filling his water bottle nevertheless. Eli answered before I could. "Yes, she says this is the way out." Patrick and I exchanged alarmed glances. "Who says?" Patrick demanded. Eli's face remained in that fixed, unsettling smile. "The old woman from the cabin, Agnes Wilcott. She's been guiding us." The name sent an unexpected jolt of recognition through me, though I was certain I'd never heard it before. Agnes Wilcott. Why did it sound familiar? "There's no woman, Eli," I said carefully. "It's just the three of us." Eli laughed, a hollow sound that echoed strangely in the forest. "She's right beside you, Marcus. Can't you see her? Her hand is on your shoulder." I jerked away involuntarily, spinning around to find nothing, just empty air and the endless trees. "Stop it," Patrick snapped, fear making his voice harsh. "This isn't funny." "I'm not trying to be funny," Eli said, his voice suddenly back to normal. He looked confused, the unnatural smile gone. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe whatever had happened at the cabin had worn off. Maybe we had our friend back. "You've been acting strange," I explained, "talking about some old woman named Agnes Wilcott." Eli's brow furrowed. "I don't remember saying anything like that." He looked around, taking in our surroundings with apparent confusion. "Where are we? This doesn't look like the trail." Patrick quickly filled him in on our situation, how we'd gotten lost, our contaminated supplies, and our plan to follow the downward slope to civilization. Eli listened with growing concern, but his reaction seemed genuine, his eyes clear and normal. "Last thing I clearly remember is entering that cabin," he admitted. "Everything after that is foggy." We decided to follow the stream despite my misgivings. It was the only clear path through the increasingly dense forest, and the sight of running water was somewhat comforting after hours of disorientation. As we walked, Eli seemed entirely himself again, even joking about how he'd never live it down if we had to be rescued by park rangers. Patrick gradually relaxed as well, though he still kept a wary eye on both of us. The stream widened as we followed it, eventually opening into a small, still pond. On the far shore stood a crude wooden structure, not quite a cabin, more like a shack, built directly against the trunk of a massive oak tree. "Should we check it out?" Eli asked, then quickly added, "Together this time." Patrick shook his head emphatically. "After what happened at the last place? No way." I was inclined to agree with Patrick, but something caught my eye. Smoke, rising in a thin column from a chimney I hadn't noticed at first. Someone was there. "Look," I pointed. "Someone's home. They might be able to help us." "Or they might be some backwoods psycho," Patrick countered. "This isn't exactly prime real estate for normal folks." "We need help," I argued. "We're lost, our supplies are ruined, and night will fall eventually. I'd rather take my chances with whoever's in there than spend another night in these woods." After some debate, we agreed to approach cautiously. We circled the pond, calling out as we neared the shack to announce our presence. "Hello, anyone home? We're lost hikers, need some help." No response came from the shack, though the smoke continued to rise from the chimney. The structure looked even more decrepit up close, walls made of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, a roof of overlapping bark pieces, and a door that was little more than a deerskin stretched over a wooden frame. Yet, despite its primitive appearance, something about it suggested recent habitation. The ground around it was swept clean, and hanging from the eaves were bundles of dried herbs and small animal bones strung together in complex patterns. "I really don't like this," Patrick whispered. Before anyone could respond, the deerskin door was pushed aside, and a figure emerged from the dark interior. She was ancient, her face a mass of deep wrinkles, her body bent and twisted with age. Her white hair hung in long matted strands around her face, and her eyes, when they fixed on us, were milky with cataracts yet somehow still piercing. "I've been expectin' you boys," she said, her voice as rough as tree bark. "Come on in for Dark Falls. Not safe out here after sundown." The three of us stood frozen, exchanging uncertain glances. Despite everything in me screaming to run, I found myself strangely drawn to the old woman. There was something familiar about her, though I was certain we'd never met. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Folks hereabouts call me Agnes," she replied. "Agnes Wilcott." The same name Eli had mentioned earlier. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. "How did you know we were coming?" Patrick demanded, finding his voice. The old woman, Agnes, smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white and even in her ancient face. "The forest tells me things. Now you coming in or not? Your choice, but I wouldn't want to be out there when night falls." I looked at my friends. Patrick was already slowly backing away, shaking his head. Eli's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on Agnes with an intensity that made me uneasy. "We appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but we need to keep moving. Could you tell us the fastest way to the nearest road or town?" Agnes cackled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Ain't no roads where you boys are. Ain't been for a long, long time." "That's impossible," Patrick interjected. "We're in the Chattahoochee National Forest. There are roads and towns all over." "You ain't in Chattahoochee no more," Agnes said, her milky eyes somehow finding each of our faces in turn. "You crossed over when you entered my circle. You're in my forest now." The stone circle we'd found on the trail. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the bones arranged at its center. "What do you mean, crossed over?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "There are thin places in the world," Agnes explained, as if to children. "Places where the veil between wears thin. My ancestors found this one centuries ago, been guarding it ever since." "You're crazy," Patrick said, backing further away. "Marcus, Eli, let's go. Now." Agnes ignored him, her attention focused solely on Eli. "You felt it, didn't you, boy? When you entered my cabin? The call of the forest? The hunger?" Eli nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," he whispered. "I felt it." "Eli?" I reached for his arm, but he shrugged me off. "She's been talking to me," he said, his voice taking on that flat quality again. "Since the cabin, showing me things. This forest is ancient, Marcus, alive in ways we can't understand, and it's hungry." "That's enough," Patrick snapped, grabbing my shoulder. "We're leaving. Eli, come on." But Eli made no move to follow as Patrick tugged me away from the shack. Instead, he took a step toward Agnes, who smiled wider. "Eli," I shouted. Don't." He paused, turning to look at me. For a moment I saw confusion in his eyes, a flicker of the friend I knew. Then Agnes reached out one gnarled hand and placed it on his shoulder. "He's made his choice," she said, "as must you." Darkness was falling rapidly now, the forest dimming around us. From the depths of the trees came sounds, rustling, cracking, and that same whistling tune we'd heard the night before, now coming from multiple directions at once. "Last chance," Agnes called as Patrick pulled me away. "Stay and live, or go and join the others." "What others?" I called back. Agnes grinned, and even in the fading light her teeth suddenly looked too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "The ones who feed the forest." Patrick and I ran. There was no conscious decision, no plan, just pure animal fear driving us away from the shack, away from Agnes, away from whatever Eli was becoming. We crashed through the undergrowth, following the stream in what we hoped was a downstream direction. Behind us, laughter echoed through the trees. Agnes's raspy cackle mingled with something that might have been Eli's voice, distorted beyond recognition. Night fell completely as we ran, but we dared not stop. The darkness around us seemed alive, pulsing with malevolent awareness. The forest was no longer passive. It was hunting us. "We have to find shelter," Patrick gasped as we paused to catch our breath. "We can't be out in the open after what she said." I nodded, too winded to speak. We had been running for what felt like hours, yet the forest showed no signs of thinning. If anything, the trees were growing denser, their twisted branches reaching out like grasping hands. A scream shattered the night, high, agonized, and unmistakably human. It came from somewhere behind us, in the direction we had fled from. "Eli," I whispered. Patrick grabbed my arm as I instinctively turned toward the sound. "Don't even think about it. That's what they want. But if he's hurt—" "That wasn't a hurt scream, Marcus. That was—" Patrick trailed off, unable to put into words what we both knew. The scream had contained pain, yes, but also something else, a quality of transformation, of becoming something other than human. We found a small cave formed by a fallen tree and a rock outcropping. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection on 3 sides. We huddled inside, backs against the rock, watching the darkness beyond our small shelter. "What's happening, Marcus?" Patrick whispered, his voice cracking. "What is this place?" I had no answers that made any sense. Everything I knew about the world, about reality itself, had been upended in the span of a day. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to stay alive until daylight. Then we keep moving downhill. We have to reach the edge of whatever this is." Patrick nodded, but his eyes were distant. "Do you think Eli is dead?" The question hung between us, impossible to answer. The scream replayed in my mind, its inhuman quality sending fresh shivers down my spine. "I don't know," I said again, the words inadequate but all I had to offer. We took turns keeping watch through the night, though neither of us managed more than brief, fitful moments of sleep. The forest never fell silent. Always there were sounds of movement, of whispers just beyond our understanding. Twice we heard the whistling, so close it seemed to be right outside our shelter. And once, just before dawn, I heard Eli's voice calling my name. "Marcus, Patrick, where are you guys? I got away. I need help." Patrick gripped my arm so tightly it hurt, shaking his head frantically. We both knew it wasn't really Eli out there, or if it was, he wasn't Eli anymore. Dawn arrived with agonizing slowness, gray light filtering through the trees. The forest looked different in daylight, less actively malevolent perhaps, but no less wrong. The trees curved in impossible ways, their bark covered in the same symbols I had seen in the cabin. The ground beneath our feet felt spongy, almost pulsating. We left our shelter, oriented ourselves as best we could, and continued downhill. Neither of us mentioned Eli or the screams in the night. To acknowledge them would be to accept a reality too terrifying to face. Around midday, we found the bodies. They hung from the trees in various states of decay, some fresh enough to recognize as human, others little more than bone and sinew woven into the very bark of the trees. Their position suggested they had been absorbed slowly, the wood growing around and through them in a grotesque embrace. "Oh, God," Patrick choked out, doubling over to vomit. I couldn't look away. There were dozens of them. A macabre forest of human remains. Men and women of various ages, their faces frozen in expressions of agony or, worse somehow, ecstasy. Some wore the tattered remains of hiking gear like us. Others were dressed in clothing from different eras. A man in what looked like 1970s attire, a woman whose dress suggested the early 1900s. "The ones who feed the forest," I whispered, remembering Agnes's words. A rustling sound from behind made us both whirl around. Nothing was visible, but the underbrush was moving slightly, as if something had just passed through it. "We need to go," Patrick said urgently. "Now." We ran again, no longer trying to maintain direction, just desperate to escape the grotesque graveyard. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching down to claw at our faces, roots rising up to trip our feet. We were no longer simply lost in a forest. We were being herded. Eventually, exhausted, we emerged into a clearing. In its center stood a familiar sight, the stone circle we had discovered on our first day, with its small pile of bones. We had somehow been driven in a complete circle. "No," Patrick moaned. "This can't be happening." Before I could respond, movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. A figure stepped out of the tree line. Eli, but not Eli. His body was still recognizably human, but his movements were wrong, too fluid and precise. His eyes, when they fixed on us, were completely black, like empty sockets. "You shouldn't have run," he said, his voice echoing strangely, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "Agnes wanted to prepare you properly. It hurts more this way." "Eli," I said, taking a step toward him. "Fight it. Whatever this is, you can fight it." He tilted his head, an inhumanly smooth motion. "Eli is here. He's just sharing now. We all share in the forest." More figures emerged from the trees, perhaps a dozen in total. Some looked recently human, like Eli. Others were more grotesquely transformed, their bodies twisted and elongated, bark-like growths protruding from their skin. Behind them came Agnes, moving with surprising agility for one so ancient. "Told you, boys," she cackled. "Not safe after dark, but day ain't much better for those the forest wants." Patrick and I backed toward the center of the clearing, instinctively moving away from the approaching figures even though there was nowhere to run. "What do you want from us?" I demanded. "Want?" Agnes seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Ain't about want. It's about need. The forest needs to feed. Has done since long before my people found this place. We just help it along, guide the offerings." "Offerings?" Patrick's voice was faint with terror. "Most who wander in are taken quick," Agnes continued as if discussing the weather. "But some, special ones, the forest wants to keep, like your friend here." She patted Eli's shoulder affectionately. "He'll be a fine guardian once the change is complete." The figures had formed a complete circle around us now, blocking any chance of escape. They moved with unnatural synchronization, like parts of a single organism. "Please," I begged, though I knew it was futile. "Just let us go. We won't tell anyone about this place." Agnes laughed. "Oh, child, ain't nobody would believe you anyway, but the forest don't let go what it claims." The circle began to tighten, the figures moving closer in perfect unison. I grabbed a rock from the ground, a pathetic weapon against whatever these creatures were, but better than nothing. "Stay back," I shouted, brandishing the rock. Beside me, Patrick had armed himself similarly, his face pale but determined. The creatures paused, looking to Agnes for direction. She studied us with her milky eyes, something like respect in her ancient face. "Got spirit, these two," she remarked to Eli. "The forest loves spirit, makes the changing all the sweeter." "Run for the gap," I whispered to Patrick, indicating a slightly wider space between two of the less transformed figures. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. We bolted simultaneously, charging toward the gap with desperate speed. The creatures reacted instantly, but their movements were oddly fluid rather than quick, like trees swaying in wind rather than predators pouncing. We broke through the circle, the cold touch of bark-like fingers just grazing my neck as we passed. "Run!" I screamed, though Patrick needed no encouragement. We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping our faces, roots seemingly rising to trip us. Behind us, a chorus of inhuman wails rose from the clearing. The forest itself seemed to fight against our escape. Vines snaked across our path. Trees appeared to shift position, blocking routes that had been clear moments before. The ground became increasingly treacherous, patches of earth giving way beneath our feet to reveal gaping pits lined with sharpened roots like teeth. "They're hurting us again," Patrick gasped as we veered away from another suddenly appearing obstacle. He was right. Every time we tried to maintain a downhill course, something forced us to change direction. We were being driven along a predetermined path, though to what end, I couldn't imagine. A whistling sound cut through the air, and Patrick screamed, stumbling to his knees. A crude arrow protruded from his thigh, its shaft made of twisted wood, its head a shard of obsidian. "Go," he urged as I stopped to help him. "Get help." "I'm not leaving you," I insisted, slinging his arm around my shoulders. His weight nearly dragged me down, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. We limped forward together, slower now but still moving. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust the silence. The forest was patient. It had been here for centuries, maybe millennia. It could afford to wait. The trees thinned suddenly, and my heart leaped with hope. Had we somehow reached the edge of this nightmare? But as we emerged from the tree line, that hope died. We stood at the edge of a vast ravine, its depths lost in shadow. On the other side, perhaps 100 yards away, the forest continued unbroken. "We're trapped," Patrick moaned, pain making his voice thin. I eased him down against a boulder, examining the arrow in his leg. It had gone clean through the muscle, missing the bone and major arteries from what I could tell. Still, the wound was ugly, the flesh around it already darkening in a way that had nothing to do with normal bruising. "I need to get this out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's going to hurt." Patrick nodded grimly, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. I broke off most of the shaft, then, after giving him my belt to bite down on, pulled the remainder through the wound in one quick motion. Patrick's scream was muffled by the leather, but his body convulsed with agony. Dark, viscous fluid pulsed from the wound, not normal blood, but something thicker, with greenish streaks running through it. The skin around the entry and exit points was turning black, a network of dark veins spreading outward like roots. "Poison," Patrick gasped as I used strips torn from my shirt to bind the wound. I didn't contradict him, though poison seemed inadequate to describe whatever corruption was spreading through his leg. This was something older and more primal than any toxin I knew of. "We need to keep moving," I said, looking anxiously over my shoulder. The forest behind us remained still, but that meant nothing. "Maybe there's a way down into the ravine." Patrick shook his head weakly. "I can't, Marcus. You go. Find help." "I told you, I'm not leaving you." "Look at my leg," he insisted. "Really look at it." I did. The blackness had spread halfway up his thigh in the few minutes since I'd removed the arrow. The veins had thickened, pushing against his skin from beneath, creating ridges that looked disturbingly like the patterns in tree bark. "It's changing me," Patrick whispered. "Like Eli. I can feel it. Inside. Moving. Growing." Horror choked me as I realized he was right. Whatever had taken Eli was now claiming Patrick too, but in a different way. Not through mental influence, but through direct physical corruption. There has to be something I can do, I insisted, though deep down I knew there wasn't. This was beyond anything medical science could address. Patrick grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. Listen to me. You need to go. Find the edge of this place. Get back to the real world and never return. His eyes were clear despite the pain, focused intently on mine. Promise me. Before I could respond, a voice called from the tree line behind us. Ain't no edge to find, boy. Agnes emerged from the forest, alone this time. She moved with that same unsettling agility, covering ground far faster than her ancient appearance suggested possible. The forest goes on forever for those it claims, she continued, stopping a few yards away. Cycles back on itself, a perfect prison. You're lying, I snarled, rising to stand protectively in front of Patrick. Every forest has boundaries. Agnes smiled, those two perfect teeth gleaming. This ain't just any forest. Told you before, it's a thin place, a fold in the world where something old broke through long ago. She gestured around us. All this, just the physical manifestation of something much larger, something hungry. Let us go, I pleaded, desperation replacing anger. Please, we won't tell anyone. Ain't up to me, Agnes shrugged. The forest decides who stays and who goes, and it's decided about your friends already. A rustling from the forest announced new arrivals. Eli emerged first, those black eyes fixing on me with alien intelligence. Behind him came the other transformed humans, moving in that fluid, unsettling way. But what made my blood freeze was the figure that came last. Patrick, walking upright despite the arrow wound, despite the blackness that now covered his entire leg. Except it wasn't Patrick. Not really. His eyes had gone completely black, like Eli's, and his movements had that same inhuman quality. Patrick? I whispered, looking back at where I'd left him, only to find the boulder empty. Somehow, without me noticing, he had been taken and transformed in moments. The change comes quicker when they stop fighting, Agnes commented, following my gaze. Your friend there surrendered. Made it easier. The Patrick thing smiled at me, head tilting at that unnatural angle I'd seen in Eli. It doesn't hurt anymore, Marcus. Nothing hurts. Join us. I backed away, edging closer to the ravine. The group advanced slowly, unhurried, confident in my captivity. What are you? I asked Agnes, playing for time as I desperately tried to think of a way out. Just a caretaker, she replied. Been in my family for generations. We watch the thin place, guide the offerings, help the forest feed. She gestured to the transformed humans. These ones are special. The forest wants them to stay, to become part of it. Guardians, you might say. And me? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. You? Agnes studied me with those milky eyes. You got too much fight in you. The forest will take that fire. Use it. Won't be quick like your friends. You'll feed it slowly, year by year, until there's nothing left but a husk. My back met empty air. I had reached the edge of the ravine. Below, darkness waited, its depths unknowable. No other way out, boy, Agnes said almost gently. Come on back from there. Make it easier on yourself. The circle of transformed humans had nearly reached me, their movements synchronizing into a hypnotic rhythm. Among them, Eli and Patrick watched with those hollow black eyes, their faces stretched in identical, unnatural smiles. Time seemed to slow as I considered my options. Surrender meant a fate worse than death. Absorption into whatever entity controlled this place, my identity erased, my body transformed into another guardian. The ravine behind me promised a quick end. But what if that was just another trap? What if the fall didn't kill me but left me broken for Agnes and her forest to collect at leisure? As if reading my thoughts, Agnes spoke again. "The ravine circles back too, boy. All paths lead to the forest. That's the nature of a thin place." But something about the way she said it, a hint of urgency in her tone that hadn't been there before, made me wonder. Was she lying? Was the ravine actually a way out? In that moment of hesitation, Eli lunged forward with inhuman speed, his bark-like fingers reaching for my throat. I reacted instinctively, dodging to the side. Time returned to normal speed as I made my decision. If all paths led back to the forest as Agnes claimed, then I had nothing to lose. And if she was lying, I turned and jumped. The sensation of falling was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Wind rushed past my ears, drowning out the inhuman screams from the cliff edge above. The darkness of the ravine enveloped me, a void that seemed to go on forever. I had time to think, absurdly, that Agnes had been telling the truth after all, that this fall would never end. Just another infinite loop in the forest's domain. Then, impact. Pain exploded through my body as I hit water, not the jagged rocks I had expected. The shock drove the air from my lungs, and cold darkness closed over my head as I sank beneath the surface of what felt like a fast-moving river. Instinct took over. I kicked upward, breaking the surface with a desperate gasp. The current carried me swiftly away from the ravine, through a narrow gorge carved into the rock. Above, the forest was visible on both sides, its twisted trees leaning out over the water as if reaching for me. I made no attempt to swim for shore. If the river led deeper into the forest's domain, so be it. I couldn't fight both the current and whatever waited on land. But if there was even a chance it led outward, to the boundaries of this nightmare, I had to take it. My body collided with rocks as the river churned through rapids, each impact sending fresh waves of pain through my already battered frame. I struggled to keep my head above water, swallowing mouthfuls when the current pulled me under. How long I was carried along, I couldn't say. Minutes or hours, distance impossible to judge in the twisting gorge. The sky above darkened. Whether from approaching night or storm clouds, I couldn't tell. Eventually, the river widened and slowed. The trees flanking its course began to change. Less twisted, more natural in their growth. Hope flickered to life inside me. Was I approaching the edge of Agnes's domain? The change happened suddenly. One moment I was still in the gorge, dense forest pressing close on either side. The next, the river had carried me into open water, a small lake surrounded by normal pine woods. Ordinary, beautiful Georgia forest without a twisted tree or stone circle in sight. I dragged myself to shore, collapsing on a narrow beach of smooth pebbles. Every muscle screamed in protest, my body a catalog of injuries from the fall and river journey. But I was alive. And, more importantly, I was out. In the distance, I could see cabin lights twinkling through the trees, a ranger station or private property, I couldn't tell which. Normal human habitation, probably with a phone I could use to call for help. As I lay catching my breath, gathering strength for the final push to safety, movement in the water caught my eye. A ripple heading toward shore, toward me. My heart lurched with renewed fear. Had something followed me from the forest? But it was just driftwood, a twisted branch carried by the same currents that had delivered me. It washed up on the shore a few feet away, its form strangely familiar in the fading light. I looked closer, then scrambled backward in horror. It wasn't driftwood. It was a human arm, transformed partially into wood. Fingers elongated into twigs. Bark covering what had once been skin. Around the wrist, barely visible beneath the transformation, was a watch I recognized instantly. Patrick's watch. The special edition he'd saved months to buy. As I stared, paralyzed by the grotesque sight, the fingers twitched. Slowly, deliberately, they curled into a beckoning gesture. From the water came a sound that froze my blood, that same whistling tune that had haunted us in the forest. And beneath it, almost too faint to hear, voices. Eli's, Patrick's. and others, countless others, merged into a chorus that rose from the depths of the lake. "Marcus, come back to us. The forest is waiting." I ran. Ignoring pain, ignoring exhaustion, I ran toward the cabin lights as if all the demons of hell were on my heels. Behind me, the whistling continued, accompanied by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I never returned to Blood Mountain or any part of the Chattahoochee National Forest. The official report listed Eli and Patrick as missing hikers, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. Search parties found no trace of them, or of the cabin we'd discovered, or of an old woman named Agnes Wilcott. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I hear that whistling tune, and in my dreams, I see the forest, not as it appears on maps or to ordinary hikers, but as it truly is. An ancient, hungry entity that waits patiently for unwary travelers to cross the boundaries of its domain. And I know, with bone-deep certainty, that Eli and Patrick are still there, still watching, still waiting for me to return, because the forest doesn't let go what it claims. And in some small way, it claimed me too. A piece of me remains in that twisted woodland, a shadow self that walks with the guardians, whistling that haunting tune, beckoning others to join the endless, hungry cycle. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear I see a flicker of blackness in my eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to wonder if I truly escaped after all.